Good morning. Good morning. Hello. Oh no. 1 second. Test. Test, test, test. 1, 2, 3. Oh no. Hello. 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 Oh no. I hear myself and it's terrifying to hear yourself. First of all, let me check this. Yeah, this is working. Oh, is something wrong with this? Hello? This is so unprofessional. I'm like fixing my volume and my. Oh my god. This is bad. What's wrong? I don't want to hear myself. Yeah. Wow. Why didn't I check that just now? Hello? Hello? Oh, God. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Okay. Got it. So I did some stupid shit and changed my own setting, and I forgot that I changed my own setting. Now I'm not hearing myself. Great. Because it's cringe as hell if you hear yourself. Okay, anyway. Oh my god, my hair. Okay. Okay. Guys. Uh. Good morning, Jay. Oh my god. Welcome back. Oh, I didn't see you the last book. Welcome back. Oh my god, how are you doing? I didn't get the chance to like chat with you a lot lately. I've been so busy. Let's talk. So much grown in the morning. I was testing things, okay? Uh, for me, it's like a combination of like working and not working and just like doing nothing and then feel absolutely tired from doing nothing. And then when I want to do something, it tires me out even more. It's terrible. It's terrible. Do not recommend depression to anyone involved. No, I'm just testing because the last time when I did this thing, people try to like um, redeem stuff, and then I don't hear it, and I hate it when I don't hear it, because that's like the point, right? Like people claim like hydrate and stretch, and I don't hear anything. Well, and then I just get so engrossed in reading that I don't hear them asking me to stretch or hydrate. Then I just don't do it. Like that's not nice. People spend their points to ask me to like hydrate myself while I'm reading. Yeah, that's definitely your favorite. The piggy is definitely your favorite uh, emoticon emoji right now, I think. The frog one is really great. The frog one is really fucking good. Stuart did a great job on the frog one. Yeah. uh, hello, another viewer in the chat. Do say something and let me know that you are there. So we have Sam Caroli, aka Jay, in the chat. Today we are starting a new book, and for the first time ever, I'm reading a book that is not written by an Asian writer. Um, that means I'm not racist. No, just kidding. uh, no, I like I like writers of all kind if whatever that they write appeals to me. But the reason why I pick only and mostly um, Asian writers is because I think that they are very what do you call that? In Okay, my brain is not working so early this morning. I mean, it's not that early, but my brain is. I don't usually wake up early. Uh, anyway, I read Asian writers because they Asianese, yes, Asianese. Oh man, Jay. If I ever go to Melbourne one day, I'll let's go grocery shopping together. That would be a fun activity. I went to Singapore recently. I did some grocery shopping, but I didn't do any live stream this time because I don't know. I wasn't feeling the best this time around on my trip to. Oh, but I did get tattoos in Singapore, which is great. I got two new tattoos again. Like, I have 10 tattoos in total now. An actual gangster. Yes. Who's the other person in my viewer? I think it's probably Zapok. 10 tattoos. Yes, 10 tattoos. 10 tattoos. Yes. Anyway, as I was saying, I just like to tend to read Asian writers because I think that there are a lot of like really good Asian writers. Um, so I would like to read their books to you. But today, if you guys don't follow me on my Twitter or uh, if you guys are not in my Discord, I actually wrote a little something on Discord um, regarding this book that we are going to read now. So, um, this book is the one book that made me like reading, and it's funny how that I just think it's like hilarious how it's not hilarious, but it's like kind of like funny that uh, the first book that I ever read is so fucked up. Uh, and I was like 13 or 14 years old. I really cannot remember. So many years ago, I never really liked reading that much. So but at the same time, I wasn't really a normal teenager either because I have friends, maybe acquaintances, not really friends, and I don't have a computer. So, peop what? Oh, really? Oh my god, I'm a genius. Like, super genius. Is that why people can't? How do I? Oh, okay, never. Nice. Okay, I'm gonna put a never. I'm a fucking genius. Thank you so much for telling me that, Jay. I'm not smart. So, paste, save. So anyway, as I was saying, um, wait, hang on. Please join my Discord here. This should be the right one. This should be the this should be the one that will not expire forever. Anyway, so that's my join my Discord if you guys are interested in joining a Discord. My Discord is not very active. People don't really talk in it. I personally don't really use it either, but it's a good place for me to like do announcement or like have a little talks in like I chat. Yes. Oh, welcome, Sam Curly. Do tell everyone to join who are interested. Anyway, so as I was saying, right? So I don't I don't have a computer, so I don't really have internet access until I was like in my early 20s, and that there was one time I came to this state that I'm living in right now, to meet to have it for a school holiday. Like for school holidays, like we have like sometimes a month and a half of school holiday towards the end of the year. So sometimes my dad will bring us travel. Most of the time I just stay home. A lot of kids around my age at the time would go and work part-time jobs or full-time jobs at like supermarkets and whatever. uh, I'm privileged, so I don't have to. Nah, just kidding. It's like my parents never trust me enough to let me go and work somehow. It's very weird. So sometimes I would come to this state, which the city state, and just hang out with my cousins and my aunts and something. So there was one time my aunt was like, they were moving, so she was like cleaning up her room and everything, and she just uncovered like a box of like just novels, any kind of novel, like any kind of novels really. Like I think she has most of the novels that she has are like romance novel. Hello viewers in my chat, I mean, thank you for joining. I'm just telling a story how I found this book and why am I reading this book right now. So she so to continue the story, my aunt found a box of like just books, a lot of romance books, a lot of romance, and when I flipped through those romance books, it's like there's like a lot of like sex scenes and all that, that kind of like, you know. And then at 13, 14-year-old me, I feel like, to be honest, right, to be completely honest, at 13 and 14 years old, I feel like I'm very, very much asexual. Like I really don't think about anything romance at all. I think I was quite a weird kid, I would say. Um, Not that I'm not weird now. I'm still very weird now. But I think I have a feeling that I was very asexual in my teenagehood. Like I never look at guys and think that, oh, they're so hot. No, never. Like if I don't look at girls that way either. It's I came from a girls' school, so I don't know. That's just something. I'm not a normal teenager. So my aunt found all these bunch of books, and I really wanted to like have at least one. And I was choosing amongst all those like romance novel and some other like more childish novels, uh, like young adult stuff. And I was like young adult stuff from the 80s, by the way. My aunt was like in her teenagehood in the 80s, so this is around like maybe early 2000s that we were looking at this box of books. So and then I saw this book and I thought like, this is very interesting. It's a doll with like a girl dragging a doll with blood on the floor and saying afternoon of the Gosling. Seems pretty interesting. And then I read the not synopsis, like, but it's like a snippet of the book. And the first line is, "Please God, make Kathleen go away," Cerise whispered. And as soon as I read that line, my view was just gone because I'm not reading the book. I'm so sad. Anyway, when I read that, I was like, I want this book, and I'm going to read this book. And my dad never liked me read any kind of novels. He thinks that if I'm reading a novel, it would be best if I read a textbook instead. So that's why I was like, I do not dare to like read any books or anything until I found this book. So it's been 11 past 11 and I've been wasting a lot of time. People came in and then ran away because I'm so boring. Um, and I hope that more people will come in soon. Anyway, I'm gonna start reading now. Uh, this is the first novel that I have ever read in my lifetime, and I hope that you guys will enjoy it as well. It's a pretty weird one, I would say, but I really like the story, so I hope that you guys will like it as well. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water, and we are going to start reading Afternoon of the Gosling by Marlys Huffman. Chapter 1. It came at him from the left, out of a clump of wild blackberry vines, a small white blur, a dull thump. Phil's stomach muscles twisted and jerked into spasms when he felt the impact. The moment of the car whirled the tiny body into the air. It flashed briefly in front of the windshield, then flipped end over end. A shrill squeal pierced the air. The squeal mingled with the screech of tires to stop, to bring the green Pinto skidding to a spine-shaking stop. Phil Thayer Phil Thayer pulled himself up from the seat and peered across the car over Wilma's shoulder. He kept the brake pedal forced down against the floorboard until a tremor ran through his leg and the tendons of his ankle ached. Like a punctured concertina, the body lay folded in the roadside ditch. With one last high-pitched whimper, the dog's mouth gaped and spewed blood onto the curled sprigs of a bracken. The furry white body heaved once, expelled one final trickle of blood, and froze in death. In the tangled blackberry vines, a blue jay screamed obscenely and soared into the air. A blue flash dipped low over the car and disappeared over a swaying fir. The Oregon Country Road settled back into silence. Phil eased himself down onto the seat. His long fingers gripped the steering wheel and tried to shake it from the column. He shook it with an inner fury, as if the wheel could pump air back into the animal's lifeless body. Oh no! His voice trailed off, cracking in the depth of his throat. He swallowed hard and released his grip. If only he could dislodge the mixture of horror and anger surging through his chest. Anger at the owner who let the dog run loose. Horror at realizing 3-year-old Cerise was confronted with death. It wasn't the image he wanted to implant in her mind. Her new stepfather, the dog killer. Didn't most children love dogs? He wasn't firm on ground. With Cerise, not yet. He was not sure She accepted him. She looked at him with a sober, wary expression. She called him Daddy Phil. But she hardly ever smiled at his attempts to amuse her. Phil glanced at his wife before he turned towards the back seat. Wilma's crystal blue eyes were wide and glazed. For once, her mouth was open without a sound emerging. She stared trance-like out of the car window, stared at the little ditch gape in shock. The skin pulled tightly across her cheekbones had taken on a pallor, leaving red blotches on her face. The blotches looked suspiciously like cosmetics. Blush? Was Wilma wearing blush? She was adept with makeup. Phil clenched his fist on the wheel. He would explain how narrow-minded his mother was, but Wilma had to have everything spelled out to her. His fingers relaxed, and he looked away. It probably wouldn't make any difference. His mother wasn't going to accept Wilma as a daughter-in-law, not willingly. At least, Wilma could have tried to make the situation easier. She could have skipped the blue eyeshadow and the eyeliner for one afternoon. Cerise emitted a piercing screech that made him wince. The screech reverberated in the compact sedan and sawed through his already stretched out nerves. Cerise? He turned and leaned over the back of the seat. Cerise, are you alright? The little girl stood on the seat, bouncing gleefully up and down, onto her toes and then onto her heels. The tiered ruffles of her pink-dotted dress rippled in playful excitement. The delicate blonde hair swirled with every jump. One strand slithered from its barrette. Her green eyes glistened from under skimpy, colorless lashes. Make the noise again, Daddy Phil! A delighted giggle bubbled in her throat. She clapped her small hands together and hopped ecstatically around, making an improvised trampoline in the car seat. Doggy made a funny voice! She squealed and continued to jump. A white smile showed a sharp, shining baby teeth. Make him do it again! Phil's spine shuddered at the penetrating sound of her voice. She was attempting to imitate the dog's final squeal of agony. Cerise! The dog is dead! He can't do it again! Phil Thayer stared at his stepdaughter and turned back to his wife. His mouth fell open as he turned his head. Wilma, she's... He continued to move his head from side to side and groped for words. I don't understand how she could laugh about a thing like this, Wilma. He reached across the car, digging his fingers into his wife's arms and shaking it as his words failed to penetrate and interrupt her horrified stare. Wilma! Her head turned towards him. She looked directly into his face, but her eyes were blank. Phil's hand twisted the ignition key with a quick, angry move. The engine caught and roared when he thrummed viciously on the gas pedal. Aren't you going to do anything about the dog? Wilma asked. What do you expect me to do? I can't do anything for it. The animal's dead. Aren't you supposed to find an owner or something? He slid the car into gear and pulled back into the road, picking up speed to get away from the site. Look around you, Wilma. See any houses here? I would have to go down side roads and hunt for hours. We don't have time enough to do anything about the dog. He pushed down on the accelerator, sending the car into a burst of speed, more anxious than ever to put the area out of his line of vision. We could have buried it or something. Oh, sure. With what? The next thing I know, you'll be asking me to preach a sermon for the creature. Wilma opened her mouth. A nervous giggle tumbled out, stabbed at his eardrums, and mounted into a quick intake of air. It produced a melodic effect of starving donkey. Well, why not? You're a minister, aren't you? The words sent her into another spasm of snorting laughter until Phil clenched his teeth. Stop it, Wilma! With one last choke-off snort, Wilma subsided into chewing on the flesh of her thumb while he increased the car's speed. Stark Street was straight at this point. They would soon be approaching the curve that led down the river, but he wouldn't be able to sustain any speed on the serpentine route. He knew the road to his mother's as well as he knew the curves on Wilma's body. It wasn't possible to make up any time on the old highway into Springdale. I told mother we'll be there by 1, and it's almost 1 now. She doesn't like it when people are late. Isn't she ever late for anything? Of course not. He scowled as the road twisted sharply and he eased back onto the accelerator. She arrives 5 minutes early for everything. When she says 1 o'clock, she means exactly 1. He didn't bother to add that if his mother was 10 minutes early, she would sit in her car until the proper time. Wilma would never understand his mother's precision in dealing with life. The road began dipping down towards the river. Rockwork guardrails of grey boulders lined the edges of the winding street. A dense growth of alders overhanging the pavement allowed occasional patches of sunlight to flash across the car windows and made him squint his eye in rapid adjustment to the light changes. The summer air cooled in the tunnel of shade. Phil concentrated on manipulating the downward curves until the Pinto broke into full sunlight at the bridge. What if we meet a car? Wilma's voice rose in anxiety as they approached the outdated narrow structure. I know how to drive, Wilma. It's wide enough for 2 cars, he answered curtly. It doesn't look like it, Wilma protested. Her eyes rolled with alarm, watching the metal railing. The white strips of steel appeared to be almost touching the car as Phil sped across the 2-lane span. The tires chattered over the pockmarked pavement, forcing him to keep a tight grip on the wheel. Below the bridge, the sandy river had shrunk to a small channel, shimmering with glaring reflections that struck his eyes. At the end of the bridge, he swung the car into a sharp right turn. Too sharp. Metal scraped against a retaining wall of rock. He ground his molars together, sending his square jaw jutting forward, and heard Wilma expel a sigh of relief when the car resumed a normal, smooth trajectory up the highway. Oh man, I don't understand how your mother can live so far out here all alone, Phil. We haven't seen a house for a mile. Some people like the country. You can't expect farmers to live in the city, he answered with a sarcastic tone in his voice. The back of his seat was surging in and out against his spine. Anyhow, there's a small town nearby. At least a place for groceries. But where does she go shopping? I mean, for clothes and fun things. Not everyone gets their enjoyment out of life buying clothes the way you do. His comment was cut short when the seat jolted violently, making him straighten and bump his rib cage against the steering wheel. Cerise! His eyes turned to his wife, and his words were clipped in commanding annoyance. Make Cerise stop pushing the back against the back of the seat. Wilma gave him a startled glance. She turned and leaned over the cushions, looking down at Cerise. Phil adjusted the mirror until the back seat became visible. The little girl was lying on the seat, her shoes braced against the back of his seat, pushing in and out on the fabric. Her mouth was partially open in curious fascination as she watched the material ripple in and out under the pressure of her feet. She had undone the seat belt again. He stiffened against the seat and glared at his wife. Cerise, baby, please stop. It bothers Daddy Phil's driving. She reached over and patted Cerise's legs. Please, baby. The girl's eyes met with Phil's in the mirror and clouded. Her smile vanished into a thin-lipped silence. She gave one last emphatic push that jarred Phil into an exhaled grunt. Her pale lashes fluttered, then Cerise rolled herself up onto the cushions. She smoothed her dress over her lap and folded her hands together. She gazed at the back of Phil's head with a cool, emotionless expression. Phil glared at Cerise in the rear view mirror and growled in Wilma's direction. You should simply tell her to stop. You are her mother. There's no reason to keep begging her to behave. Tell her. Don't baby her. Wilma settled back in her seat and tugged at her skirt. Maybe I should have left her with the sitter until after we visit your mother. She has been with the sitter too much now. Maybe you should have taught her to mind. He slowed the car and turned into a narrow gravel road. Stones crunched beneath the tires and a rumbling noise that forced Wilma to raise her voice. She's really not that bad, Phil. It's been a long ride. She's getting tired. We should have waited to bring her out here. Of course, your mother might like having a grandchild. Lots of women like. Wilma, quit babbling. Phil cut her off abruptly and eased the car through the yawning, washed-out strip in the road. The car jolted and picked up speed. I don't talk so much around my mother. Her face turned pale at the reproof, and the red blotches reappeared on her cheeks. She licked at her lips and rubbed them anxiously together. Well, maybe I shouldn't come here either, she said at last. Phil tapped the steering wheel with his fingertips and gave her a speculative look before he turned his eyes back to the road. It's not going to be easy, Wilma. Mother's going to have a lot of questions, and you're not clever enough to avoid giving her the wrong answers. What's wrong with the truth? Ordinarily, nothing. He dropped his voice into a deep, comforting tone. Mother's extremely old-fashioned. What's that even mean? Even her voice hadn't climbed to a tense squeak. Phil could see the confusion in Wilma's quivering lower lip. It means that she's not going to welcome you to the family with enthusiasm, and when you start babbling, you tell everything you know. His lips twisted at one corner as his own thought made him smile. Which isn't much, I admit. But there are some things my mother shouldn't be told. Like about Cerise not having a father. If you feel that way, why did you bring me out here to meet her? Maybe I should stay in the car. Why did you marry me if... Wilma, stop it! He let the car slow down to a crawl and glanced at her face. Wilma's wide blue eyes glistened with dampness, and the tip of her nose was growing pink. She was only a few seconds from a shower of tears, and when Wilma cried, her face became a swollen disaster. She certainly wouldn't be able to hide it from his mother. Honey, I married you because I wanted to. He eased the car to a stop and reached over to pat her shoulder with a gentle caress. He slid his index finger up and tickled the lobe of her ear with a coaxing smile. She felt the physical need for her as strongly as he had the first day he had seen her. It had been an overwhelming desire, a desire he hadn't wanted to conquer. No matter what his ambitions, the need to hold Wilma and make love to her couldn't be prayed away. He tried and tried, but he never finished a prayer without an image of her slender, perfectly shaped body. In the darkness of the dormitory, he had fought an erection, prayed until he was driven to slipping out of bed and fleeing into the bathroom. In the privacy of the last stall, he jacked off in shamed solitude. He knew other men resorted to masturbation, but his mother's raging lectures on the evils of the practice had left him with no recourse, only prayer. With Wilma, prayer had not helped. Only when the world went on as usual the next day was he able to accept his own sensuality. He had not gone blind. No accuser called him to account. Life was undisturbed, even though he had committed a sin he repeated until the end he married her. Wilma created the physical urge, and only Wilma could assuage it. The need had not gone away. It only intensified every time he made love to her. Even now, he could feel an erection beginning to stir. His hand slid down and caught her ears with a quick squeeze, and her lips stopped trembling. Cheer up, honey. You're my wife, and I want you. For better or for worse, remember? She nodded and groped in her pocket for tissue. She dabbed gently at her eyes, blotting the dampness away without a trace of streaked mascara. Phil watched and smiled with approval. She gave her hand one more pat and turned to ease the car back into motion. I hope we aren't going to stay long, he said. I know something's going to go wrong. I feel crummy. The worst thing you could do is talk too much, Phil answered. He slowed the car at the approach to a long driveway and eased it into a turn beside a large sign bearing black lettering, Thea's Layers. The sign was further embellished by the black outline of a chicken. Mother raises chicken, Phil said in answer to the question in Wilma's eyes. There was a bewildered look on her face as she clenched and unclenched her fists. She fumbled in her purse for a mirror and checked her hair. Don't worry, Wilma. You look great. It's one fault you don't have. It's one fault that you don't have. I've never seen you look anything except perfect. Even when you wake up, your hair is always in place. A dimple appeared on her left cheek and she flashed a row of even white teeth. I was lucky, she said, brushing at her hair with one hand. She glanced towards the back seat. Too bad Cerise didn't have my luck. Phil nodded and smiled at her as he pulled the car in front of the white two-story frame house. She had relaxed again. The tears were forestalled. Now, if she could keep her from talking, the afternoon might go better than he had hoped. He inhaled in a long breath and glanced at his watch. Only 15 minutes late. His hand reached for the door and swung it open just as Cerise aimed to kick at the back of the seat. He turned around angrily, but the little girl's face beamed with delight, and a playful giggle halted his outburst. Okay, Cerise, he sighed. Okay, Cerise, he sighed. Let's get out and exercise those overactive feet of yours. Philip, I thought you would never get here. At the sound of the woman's voice, Phil looked towards the porch. A wide grin flowed from the corners of his mouth at the glimpse of his mother. He halted Cerise's exit from the car with an abrupt, "Get out on your mother's side," then slammed the door shut with his arms outstretched, started towards the tall, sandy-haired woman. Mom! He broke into a half-run, leaving Wilma and Cerise to struggle out of the car and stand waiting. He darted towards his mother with an eagerness that surprised even himself. He grabbed her shoulder in a big hug and held on tightly, forgetting everything except being home again. An easterly breeze rippled through the short brown curls of Wilma's hair when she stepped from the car. In spite of the warm June sun, she shivered and hugged herself. The breeze sent the ties of her green chiffon blouse swirling in the air, flattened them across the mouth. She tugged at the bows, pulling them tightly to shorten the ends, and scowled as she looked at the smudge of the lipstick on the fabric. With a quick twist, she turned the material to hide the glaring red stain. Cerise dawdled her way across the cushions of the back seat, dragging one foot then the other. Finally, she thumped to the floor and made a lengthy task of crawling between the seat and the car door. For once, Wilma felt no impulse to hurry the girl. Instead, she watched her husband greet his mother. The embrace seemed to go on and on. She knew Phil had not been home for at least 2 years, but the display of affection struck her as too lavish. Of course, she thought to herself, How could she judge? Her memory of her real parents was short. They never hugged anyone, even each other. The foster homes which placed them were hardly examples to be trusted. Maybe this is how it should be. She studied her new mother in law with curiosity. Phil was 6 feet tall, and the skinny woman holding his face with both of her hands was easily as tall as her son. Wilma glanced down at her own feet. At least she had worn her highest heel, although nothing helped much when you were only 5'2". Wilma was accustomed to the world towering above her, but it gave her a little more confidence when she added a few extra inches to her height. Today, she needed every inch. Come on, baby. She caught Cerie's hand and reached for the beret. Hold still. Let's fix this. She pinned Cerie's hair back with one quick deft movement and fluffed the girl's skirt in a last swift inspection. Phil had finally broken the embrace and turned, motioning to her with one hand. Clara Thayer appraised them with an emotionless face. Wilma could feel no indication of welcome in the woman's features. In fact, no indication of any feelings at all. There was only the pair of dark brown eyes, amazingly like her son's, wide and dark lashed. The woman's face was tanned but fleshless. The skin appeared to be stretched over her skull. Even the arms protruding from the plain short-sleeved white blouse were scrawny and brown. Wilma moved up the sidewalk, holding Cerie's hand with a firm grip. Cerise trotted to match Wilma's pace, and then the little girl almost stumbled as the nervous quickness of Wilma's steps carried her tiny frame hurtling forward. Mother, this is Wilma and her daughter Cerise. Phil's bass voice rumbled in the open air with a practiced resonance. Wilma gave him an inquiring look and wondered if he hadn't emphasized the words her daughter a bit too much. She could see no sign of reaction on Phil's face either, only a placid and handsome serenity. She could have been a model posing for a magazine ad. If he had not been so dead set against smoking, Wilma imagined Phil in the magazine ad for cigarettes, like the Marlboro Man. He was totally male and outdoorsy. It amazed her to discover he was a minister. Of course, he had never seen a minister before, but he wasn't at all what she expected. She stepped forward and paused in the bottom of the steps leading to the wide porch, an immaculate porch with terracotta pots of pink geraniums and 3 carefully placed wicker chairs, each gleaming in absolute whiteness, each with its own blue striped cushion. The porch floor shone as if it had been waxed and polished. Not even a trace of a footprint marked the forest green enameled surface. It should be pleasant. It should be a pleasant place to sit on a hot day, yet everything appeared untouched. 1 second for tea. Clara Thayer looked at her impersonally. Her lips parted in a smile, but the eyes were solemn and alert. Wilma struggled to fight back a tense giggle and felt her hands begin to tremble. She shifted her stance and gripped Cerie's hand so hard that the little girl up at her with a quizzical twist at one corner of her mouth. Phil clapped his mother's shoulder and gave her a wide smile, displaying a single gold crown on his lower bicuspid. The smile broke Clara Thea's silence. She nodded to Wilma, still without visible reaction, and said, "Come on in. I've been waiting lunch." She turned to her son, and this time the brown eyes sparkled when she spoke. "I made your favorite, scalloped potatoes and pork chops." The door opened into the cool hallway with photographs of Phil's. Wilma tried not to stare as she moved past the picture of Phil in a cap and gown, Phil on horseback. There were several enlarged snapshots of Phil beside a tall, plain girl. Wilma looked up at her husband, but she was intent on herding Cerise down the hall without letting her touch the wallpaper. Cerise clawed at the air, trying to snatch the purple flowers from the wall with a determination that kept Phil busy yanking her away. To a child who had never seen wallpaper, the flowers created a magnetic attraction. After the fourth lunch, Phil snatched Cerise up and carried her into the dining room, holding her firmly in spite of her squirming. Wilma gasped at the sight of the table and swung towards her husband with a sensation of panic. She expected a farm kitchen, simple and comfortable. Not this. Not a dining table with white tablecloth dangling almost to the floor of the corners. Candles in the middle of the day, lights reflecting on crystal goblets and glistening silver stretching on both sides of every plate. To Wilma, it was already a nightmare. Which fork was she supposed to use? What if Cerise spilled something on the tablecloth? She glanced hastily at the table and gulped as she noticed there was no high chair or any concession made to Cerise's young age and size. Even worse, the chairs were upholstered with gold velour. Cerise would spill something. Wilma could feel it. Phil? She looked up at him and with a queasy sensation building up in her stomach. Would he understand what she was worrying about? What's the problem? Clara Thea's voice was flat and disinterested, as if she was asking the question out of routine politeness. Cerise? Wilma fought to keep her voice from squeaking. I guess I could hold her on my lap. She let her voice trail off meekly. The only expression on Phil's face was one of confusion. Wilma clutched the back of the chair with one hand and felt a nervous tremor running up one arm. They should have become better acquainted as a family before they visited his mother, or they should have come without Cerise. Phil didn't understand how careless a 3-year-old could be with food. How much would be spilled and stain the white linen tablecloth? A bowl of cranberries, those stains would never come out. The heavy crystal goblets at every place were going to be too hard for her to handle herself. She had seen those goblets in movies. Did you hold them by the stem? What if Cerise snatched at one? There would be water all over the table. Wilma looked up at her husband and tried to plead with her eyes. He seemed to know everything. Why couldn't he understand what problem feeding Cerise was going to be? But it was Clara Theas who grasped the situation, not Phil. Ah, don't worry. We'll put her on a stack of books. The older woman's gaze slid towards her son with a brief flash of accusation. She touched Wilma's arm lightly with her fingertips, and then withdrew her hand as if body contact was to be minimized. I'm sorry. Philip never explained how young your child was. I assume he married someone closer to his own age, and that your child was older. You hardly look old enough to be a mother. Mrs. Thayer's mouth closed in a firm, disapproving line. I'm old enough. Wilma felt her voice slip upward and quiver. Obviously. Mrs. Thayer answered in a flat monotone. Wilma sensed her cheek growing warm with embarrassment. Mrs. Thayer quickly removed the gold-edged china plate from the table and vanished through a door. The white enameled door swung freely back and forth until Clara reappeared carrying a small earthenware plate and plastic glass. Philip, she snapped in an abrupt and commanding tone. Get the unabridged dictionary from the library. That child can sit on that. Phil muttered a low, Yes, ma'am, slid Cerise into Wilma's arms and hurried from the room as if accustomed to instantly obeying to his mother's commands. Cerise flung her arms around Wilma's neck and clutched her mother's shoulder with a fierce, unrelenting strength. Wilma Wilma's arms ached. Cerie's tenacious fingers were beginning to hurt her. They waited in silence for Phil's turn. Mrs. Thayer made no attempt to start a conversation. She seemed to be trying to suspend time while Phil was out of the room. The woman stood behind her chair at the head of the table, her long skin and bone fingers curved over the back of the chair like the talons of a roosting bird. She stood without a trace of emotion, gazing across the length of the table and out of the window at the clustered rhododendron bushes with their profusion of colors. The lawn appeared dwarfed, the grass engulfed by the mountainous bushes. You sure got lots of flowers. Wilma struggled to find something to stop the silence in the room. I never seen so many. For a second, the corners of Clara Thayer's mouth drew back as if aggravated by an offending noise. Wilma bit her lower lip. Phil had said she was to let him do all the talking, but she couldn't stand here like a dummy. She wasn't sure what she had said, but something didn't seem right in her mother-in-law's expression. Maybe the woman didn't like flowers, but if she didn't, why did she have so many? Chickens, Mrs. Thayer announced. Wilma tilted her head, peering at the woman and wondering if she had heard right. It was an odd answer. Chicken manure, Clara said, drawing the words out slowly as if she was explaining to Cerise. It makes everything grow. Her head turned towards the door and her eyes lit up. Oh, there you are, Philip. She motioned to the chair at the far end of the table. Put the child there. Dinner has waited long enough. Wilma sat staring at the confusion before her. The little plate with a miniature knife laid across one side. What was it for? She looked across the table at Phil in a silent appeal for help, but his eyes were fixed attentively on his mother's face. Philip, this is quite an occasion for me. Today, when you say grace, it will be the first time you will say it in this house as an ordained minister. She was breathing the words in hushed tones, as if the honor was almost too much for her. I've never been so happy and proud. My son is now a minister. The woman's eyes filled with moisture. She folded her hands quickly and bowed her head to conceal the display of emotion. Wilma bent her head. She had learned that much in the short week of their marriage, but her mind was too confused. She couldn't follow Phil's words. There were so many that she didn't understand. Dedication, consecration, consecration. They were only long words to her. She had so much to learn, but the table in front of her was a bigger problem. She picked up at Phil, but his eyes were closed. His voice had a deep rolling sound. Thankfully, he was unaware of her wandering attention. She had a pleasant smile, enough smile as she waited for Wilma's answer. Wait, hang on. Wilma glanced towards Cerise. The girl was staring at Phil with her mouth open and her attention riveted on his face. At least she wasn't squirming. Cerise would have to be taught about saying grace before meals, but for today, the novelty of Phil's voice was keeping her entranced. The loud Amen from Clara Thayer startled Wilma. She lifted her head reluctantly. With the prayer over, she would be forced into using all these forks. If she made a mistake, Phil would be embarrassed. She watched and tried it not to show her mounting alarm when Clara reached for the platter and started to pass it. How much was a polite amount to take? To her relief, Phil spoke, making Mrs. Thayer hesitate. Why don't we pass things my way first, Mother? We pass to the right, Philip. I know, but it's time I started learning how to be a father. If we make an exception, I can help Cerise. His eyes twinkled with mischief as he added, Of course. It's an excuse to give me the chance at the food. Mrs. Thayer, disapproving frown vanished. She turned to Wilma and beamed. I hope you are a good cook. Philip always liked to eat, and pork chops with scalloped potatoes are his favorite. He never said what he liked best. She struggled to keep the quivering out of her voice. Once again, the scowl appeared on Clara Thayer's face. Wilma tried to think. What on earth had she said this time? She looked desperately at Phil. His mouth twitched impishly before he winked at her. Wilma's a great cook, Mother. I don't think I'll starve. He doled out a small portion to Cerise before passing the platter across to Wilma. She glanced quickly at Phil's plate and carefully placed her foot in the identical position on the dish in front of her. She watched every movement Phil made. The small plate was for the rolls and the butter. She would have to ask Phil how he knew what to do so perfectly. One more thing she would have to learn, but only when they ate out. She had never set a table in her house so fancy. It was a lot of extra work, and the food didn't taste any better. In fact, the pork chops were greasy, and the potatoes needed salt. And all these fancy meals must be to hide the fact that Clara Thayer was a lousy cook. By the time they reached the dessert, Wilma found it easy to relax. She smiled quietly while Phil and his mother caught up on all the news about the neighbors and the chicken farming business. Jeannie was over yesterday and brought the strawberry pie. Clara Thayer turned to Wilma with her first attempt to make her a part of the conversation. Jeannie's a girl Philip went to high school with. Mother, she was 3 years behind me. Phil gave Wilma an impish smile. Jeannie was a little pest who lived next door. Mother thought she was cute. I thought she was a pain in the neck. Clara scowled at him. I didn't say she was cute, Philip. She's a sweet girl. She turned her attention back to Wilma. Jeannie plays the organ at our church. Lovely girl. I almost come to think of her as my own daughter. In fact, I expected. Her voice stopped abruptly, and she cleared her throat at the frown of Phil's face. Wilma wondered if Jeannie was the plain-looking girl whose picture was displayed in the hall, but her thoughts were interrupted by Mrs. Thayer's next question. Philip never explained how the two of you met. Was it in the church? She had a pleasant enough smile as she waited for Wilma's answer, but the brown eyes were cold and hard. Now, Mom, you can't expect us to tell you all the romantic details. She pulled her gaze away from Wilma at the sound of Phil's voice and looked at him with a surprised arch of her eyebrows. Well, why not? I hope she's a good Christian girl. I converted her myself, Mother. My first soul brought to God. And if we count Cerise, it will be 2 souls. Not a bad accomplishment for a man who has been ordained only a month. 2 new converts brought to the service of the Lord, and a wife and a daughter. Wilma chewed at her lip as he took on what she called his preaching look, and she bent her head to avoid meeting Mrs. Thayer's piercing eyes. She couldn't escape the sharp disapproval of Clara's voice. But marriage, by a justice of peace, it's hardly a proper marriage. You should have had a minister. Didn't you learn anything in seminary? Wilma fixed her attention on the gold-edged plate, and it was her fault. Wait. Wilma fixed her attention on the gold-edged plate. It was her fault. She wanted it private and simple. Phil had said it didn't make any difference. Mother, we are married. It's all that's important, he chuckled. And Wilma raised her head. Just think, Mother, you're a grandmother now. Clara Thayer pulled out her shoulders up, her back stiff against her chair. She looked across the length of the table at Cerise. She stared at the girl for a long time and was met by an answering stare from Cerise's eyes. The two were silent, evaluating, challenging each other. It was Clara Thayer who looked away. She's not a real grandchild, Philip. Now, Mother. Be patient, Philip. Her eyes scanned Wilma's face and slid past her. She gave Cerise another study and sighed. I'll get used to the idea, I suppose, but she's so blonde. Her gaze came back to Wilma, and the tone was accusing. She certainly doesn't look like you at all. Wilma twisted her hands together under the table and murmured, "No, ma'am," while hoping Phil would find a way to get his mother's attention on another subject. "We never have blondes in our family," Mrs. Thayer stated. "Well, we do now, Mother," Phil retorted. Clara Thayer took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She remained silent for a long time, so long that Wilma glanced across the table at her husband for some indication of what was going on. Phil only raised one hand and shook his head. At last, Clara Thayer opened her eyes and pushed her chair back from the table. "The Lord says I must accept the situation, Philip. He doesn't say I must like it." She stood up with one swift motion and placed her napkin beside the table. One skinny hand lifted towards her son, as if to silence any further discussion. "I want to show you my new project, Philip." She turned towards Wilma. "The child may enjoy this. Most children enjoy baby animals." Her glance went immediately towards her son. "You know how much I always wanted a flock of geese. Don't ask me why when I have all these chickens. Used to make excuses that it was to keep the bugs down, but anyway, I finally got myself a start. 14 baby goslings." Wilma wiped quickly at Cerise's face and hands. As Phil stood up, she breathed a little easier. By some miracle, the tablecloth had come through the meal without a spot. Cerise wiggled herself off the chair and looked soberly up at Phil. He reached and caught her hand. "The dishes." Wilma hesitated. She should offer to help, but she was suddenly terrified of breaking one. They looked so fragile and expensive. Clara Thayer shrugged. "Don't worry about them. Bess is coming in to clean up." Her hands reached out and clutched Phil's arm as they went down the hall and out into the sun. Wilma trailed along behind them, almost glad to be ignored. "Who's Bess?" Phil asked. "The only Bess I remember is Bess Lawson." "But she was only a little kid." "Was a little kid, Philip? She's 15 now and not a child at all. Be lucky if she doesn't turn out like her sister. I wouldn't have her at all if I could have found anyone else." She stopped and peered at the rose bush, turned the leaves back and forth, and frowned. Not doing well. Hope it doesn't get aphids. Her fingers clutched Phil's sleeve, and they turned towards a large complex of white buildings. Told Bess the truth, Mrs. Thayer continued. She could work for a couple hours, but she couldn't bring that kid along. Bess has a child? Phil's voice sounded astonished. Good heavens, no, Mrs. Thayer answered. It's her sister's, but Bess babysits. She brought it along one day and when she was supposed to clean the house for me. Well, I can tell you. I sent her straight home. Told her I wasn't having any bastard children in the place. Born in sin. Never get rid of the taint. Wilma's lungs felt as if they were shriveling up and sinking into her stomach. She wanted to run up and snatch Cerie's hand, to pull the child back away from Clara and Phil, snatch her up, hold her where she was safe. Phil had said his mother was old-fashioned, but she was worse. The woman was. Wilma searched her mind and wished she knew a word for the hatred she was feeling. The only word that she could think of was one Phil didn't like her to use. But it fit. As far as she was concerned, Clara Thayer was a bitch. Phil could preach and tell her that hatred was wrong, but Wilma didn't give a damn. He couldn't know what she was thinking. She hated the bag of bones she had for a mother. Maybe her thoughts would send her to hell, but she wasn't going to go wherever his mother was going. She came out of her private world to hear Philip lecturing her mother. Wilma felt like screaming at him for wasting his time. The woman was impossible. All Wilma wanted to do was to get this visit over and leave. Nonsense, Philip, Mrs. Thayer snapped. Times haven't changed what's right and what's wrong. Why blame the child, mother? It's hardly the child's fault. After all, the child didn't ask to be born. I'm not going to argue with you, Philip. You always were too weak and forgiving. There's no way to remove that sort of sin. There's only one word for a child born out of wedlock. It is a bastard. Bastard? Cerie's voice rose in an imitative question. Now see what you have done, mother. Phil's voice was between a laugh and a rebuke. You have taught Cerie's a bad word. He bent down to whisper in Cerie's ear. The older woman's hand flew up to cover her mouth. Her eyes held a stricken look as she mumbled something that resembled an apology. A waft of air swept up the path and caught Wilma's hair. The breeze carried with it an odd acrid smell, a rank odor that made her wrinkle her nose in disgust. Oh, stinky! Cerie skewered. What is that smell? Wilma asked, thinking with revulsion that Cerise had described it perfectly. Chickens? Clara Thayer re-established her authority with a single word. They aren't the best smelling crops, but this is a farm, and I raise chicken. Come on. Clara pushed at the door. The metal scraping of the rollers started a flurry of squawk responses. The sound swelled into a chorus of discord, accompanied by rattling metals. Clara motioned them into a shaded interior with an impassive face. They stepped inside, and Wilma blinked her eyes to adjust the dimness. The sound grew to deafening proportions. Tiers and tiers of wire cages rose above their heads. Rows after rows of cages containing screeching white-feathered hens, each in its own wire prison, wire pens that gave the chicken little room to move, except to beat its wings in fury at the intrusion of human being. The squawks and screeches pierced Wilma's eardrums, and she was assailed with an accompanying stench of chicken manure. The rattling of the wires increased and merged with the squawking chorus. A chicken darted its beak through the wire and snatched at the tempting greenness of Wilma's blouse. She jerked the material away and shrank back from the cages. Phil caught Cerise up in his arms and held her up by one of the enclosures. Chickens! Cerise, they lay eggs. The eggs. His explanation stopped in mid-sentence when Cerise laid her hand against the cage. The feathered occupant teetered a moment in his spindly legs, tipped it, and aimed a vicious peck at those tiny fingers. Cerise let out a howl and turned towards her mother. Her eyes were panic-stricken and rolling with fear. She wrenched herself back in Phil's arms until he let her slide onto the floor. She darted to Wilma and dug her fingers into Wilma's legs, clawing up to her mother's arm. Wilma hugged Cerise tightly against her own body and shouted at Phil above the resurging uproar of chickens. "She's scared, Phil, and so am I." "Nothing to be scared of," Mrs. Thayer snorted. "They just make a lot of noise whenever someone's strange around." "Let me take her outside." Wilma looked up at Phil with a desperate hope that he would end this nightmare of an afternoon soon. Still holding Cerise with a fierce protectiveness, she headed for the door. Phil caught up with her and slid it open before she could readjust Cerise's weight and reach for the handle. His hand rested on the back of her neck and rubbed gently. "We'll be out in a few minutes." All she could do was nod and stumble out into the fresh air without answering. Her eyes stung as she continued to hold Cerise. The child's fine blonde hair floated about in the soft breeze, and slowly her tense body began to relax. The tiny fingers eased their desperate grip on Wilma's blouse. Cerise pushed against Wilma's chest and started to squirm. Wilma eased her down to the ground and stood basking in the peace of the open countryside. Cerise began to clamber up a stack of wooden crates. The ruffled dress blew up, exposing the pink underpants with lace edges. She struggled belly first over the first wooden mound of hill. When Phil and his mother emerged from the building, Wilma managed to force a smile, at least for her husband. Cerise had happily forgotten the ordeal. Phil gave her a quick hug, and Wilma slid her arm around his waist. She leaned her head against his chest and rubbed her cheek on his shirt. Mrs. Thayer sniffed and cleared her throat, turning her head away from the display of affection. "Come, child, let me show you the baby geese." Cerise halted in her climb, looked upward to the top of the stack of crates, and turned. Her climb had put her on the eye level with Clara Thayer. This time she looked directly into the woman's eyes. There was no smile on either face. Cerise maintained a long, sober study of the woman's eyes, ignoring the outstretched hand. Still unsmiling, Cerise turned and slid down from the stack of crates, one thumb at a time, until her feet dangled over the last crate and found solid footing. She shook her ruffled skirt, dusted her hands, and reached solemnly for Clara Thayer's grasp. Still without a smile on either face, they moved away from the large building and wound down a narrow dirt path towards the sound of running water. Sword-shaped ferns brushed at Wilma's skirt. Sun flickered as the evergreen trees moved gently back and forth above their heads. The goslings were caged inside a fence beside a creek. Water rippled over the moss-covered boulders and gurgled through the fencing stretched across the waterway. "Goslings have to have fresh water," Clara sniffed. Her bony hands manipulated the gate latch, and one hand waggled for them to enter the fence enclosure. "Are you sure?" Wilma hung back, but Phil's hand caught her elbow as he chuckled. "There are only 14 of these fellows, Wilma, and they're all babies." "Aren't they the cutest things?" Clara Thayer's face glowed with pride, a dappled grey ball of fluff with faint spots of ecru across his back stirred from his sun bath. The gosling stretched his tiny little wings in the air and flapped them before waddling towards the newcomers, his soft, fat belly scraping on grass. "They are not flighty birds at all," Clara announced. "They are real pets." She looked down at the birds with a proud smile. "Goslings are funny. If they don't see their natural mother in the first 10 hours, they adopt the first animal they see." She swept her hand in a half circle. "Hatch these in an incubator, so I was sure that I was the first thing they saw, and it worked. They adopted me just like a mother. Had to pen them up, or they'll follow me right into the house." Around the fence enclosure, the yellow-spotted birds began to rouse and stretch. The wings fluttered. They each stretched one web foot, then the other, bobbing their heads up and down, stirring themselves awake. "Come on, babies!" Clara stopped and, with a radiant smile, came across her face. She snapped her fingers, and then the web-footed creatures began swaying across the ground towards the noise. The big brown feet showed the beginnings of faint orange hues as they air-paddled their way across the pan. "Didn't I tell you they were cute?" she said. "They'll be all white when they are fully grown. Their feet and bills will turn orange. Never knew I could get so attached to a bunch of birds." Wilma looked anxiously at Cerise. The girl was watching the goslings with a strange tenseness in her stance. "Phil, you better pick Cerise up." She tugged at his sleeve. "She's not used to animals." "Oh, she'll be all right. What can frighten her? They are too little to frighten anyone." He patted her hand and turned back to watch the goslings tumble and roll in their awkward attempts to reach the sound emanating from Clara's fingers. Cerise continued to watch the approaching goslings with a tense concentration. Her body was rigid and her mouth wide open, mesmerized by the awkwardness of the movements. A gosling stopped, tipped his head to one side, and scrutinized a small pink tennis shoe. She darted his flat, ebony-hued bill forward, snagged one dangling shoelace, and tugged. Cerise let out a shriek. She began stomping her feet in a wild frenzy. One pink barrette slid free from her hair and was snatched up in the bill of another curious ball of feather. "Mommy!" The scream was frantic, and the child foot began beating the earth with an increasing tempo of panic. She stomped a foot down at the back of one small bird. An airless squeak emerged as the gosling died. Clara Thayer was frozen in her stooped position, her mouth open and a row of uneven teeth gaped in horror. Cerise jumped into the air with another shriek. This time, she landed with one foot held firmly on the head of another gosling. She stood watching the webbed feet beating wildly in the air. Then she stomped her other foot down on the twitching body, stomping again and again until the wings fluttered weakly and folded limply to the ground. With an uproar of frightened hisses and clacking of small black bills, the goslings fled and huddled in the far corner of the enclosure. They hissed and pushed the wire until the metal cracked and twanged in protest. Clara Thayer reached out with one shaking hand and touched the first dead gosling with the tip of her fingers. A tear trickled down her cheek. Her eyes lifted to Cerise's face, and a long moaning "Oh!" croaked from the back of her throat. Wilma bit into her fingertips. It had happened so fast. She had not realized she had put both of her hands to her mouth and was holding her breath. Cerise was watching Mrs. Thayer with an unwavering stare. Her eyes were only half open. The pale eyelashes shielded the glowing greenness of her eyes. She turned her head slowly to look up at Phil with the same defiant and watchful gaze. Her eyes opened when she tilted her head upward. The pupil contracted. The expression in her eyes was strangely mature and challenging. Wilma tore her hands away from her mouth and reached out for the girl. Phil appeared to be frozen in his reactions as his mother. Phil, I told you she wasn't used to animals. Wilma swept Cerise into her arms and pulled her tightly against her chest. She felt the girl's rigid body relax against her shoulder. I. Phil acted stunned. He stood gazing down at the dead Gosling, a bewildered certainty in his eyes. He caught his mother's elbows, pulled her to her feet, and then reached down and scooped up the two dead birds with the other hand. Wilma hugged Cerise so tightly that she could feel the child's heart pounding against her breast. She headed up the pathway to the car, carrying her child away from the chicken and the Gosling, and away from Clara Thayer. The car was the only refuge. They could stay in the car until Phil was ready to leave. Phil should have understood. He shouldn't have let this happen. She rocked Cerise back and forth with her arms, murmuring into the child's hair, "It's over, baby. It's okay." Cerise rubbed her eyes, pushed herself upright with a yawn. "I'm tired," she said. Wilma brushed the child's hair back from her pale forehead and looked at Cerise's delicate face. The fear was completely gone. A placid sleepiness had replaced the tenseness. Cerise yawned again, and Wilma gave her one more affectionate hug. "All right, let's get to the back seat and lie down." She boosted the little girl over the back of the seat and tucked her own sweater over the child. For a few seconds, Wilma watched Cerise's eyelashes flutter, and then she turned and sagged against the seat. It had all gone wrong. Everything had gone so wrong. She didn't want to go back into the house, but didn't want to stay here any longer. She especially never wanted to see another chicken or goose in her whole life, unless it was cooked and on a plate. She straightened and watched the path, dreading Phil's anger. He was bound to blame her for Cerise's action, but he should have picked Cerise up. It wasn't Cerise's fault. Cerise rubbed her eyes. The seat was making squeaky sound whenever her mother moved. She rubbed Wilma's soft knitted sweater back and forth until against her nose, and smiled to herself. With one finger, she probed the funny red spot on the side of her tennis shoe. Then, turning her foot sideways, she frowned and pulled a gray feather loose from the rubber sole of her shoe. Her foot dropped limply to the cushion. She examined the feather, smelled it, rubbed it in a circle around the tip of her nose, and smiled. She yawned once more and closed her eyes. The feather drifted lazily to the floor of the car. Clara Thayer felt her son's hand on her arm, and she rose with the sourness of the bottom of her stomach. It wasn't the death of the two Goslings. It was the look on the child's face. Those eyes. Cat eyes. Like a wild tomcat that had attacked her chickens, it had glared at her even while she threw rocks at the animals, stood and defied her until she had to get a neighbor to shoot it. What kind of child had Philip brought into her house? She held onto his arm and let her lead her out of the Gosling pen and up towards the house. Philip, the child! Her chest ached as if she had hurried too fast. She stopped and gulped in a lungful of fresh air. "Mother, it's partly my fault. Wilma told me I should pick her up." "Nonsense! She's an odd child, Philip. Did you see the look on her face? Hatred. Sheer hatred. Cerise is only 3. She's too young to know about hate. She was frightened." A moment, please, for a tea. He was nudging her elbow with a gentle force as if to push her forward, but Clara held her ground. She knew it was stubbornness, but She couldn't dismiss the look in Suri's eyes. It hadn't been fear. Philip, how can you concentrate on your ministry? The child will cause you problems, and the mother. Clara hesitated. She must choose her words carefully. She had to make Philip understand. That child was evil. The mother was unacceptable. Mother, Wilma is my wife, and I want you to like her. Philip had a fierceness in his voice she had never heard before. Clara found an uneasy tenseness swelling in her chest. In all the years of raising her son alone, Clara had never said a word to him about his father's shortcomings. She had told Philip that his father was returning from a church conference when the car accident happened. She had never mentioned the woman, the petite, dainty woman George Thayer had sneaked into Portland to visit. The woman, so much like his wife, this wife of Philip's, it had been a mistake. Raising him in a God-fearing home had not erased the sins of the father. Lust went into the blood. She began to move along the path, choosing her words in her mind before she voiced them aloud. I know, Philip, but what God joins together. Her voice failed, and she paused for a few minutes. How can you expect her to be a help to you in your work? She uses such terrible grammar. How can she talk to people or entertain? I watched her gawking at the table. She has never learned etiquette. She used her bread to clean her plate. And the makeup, Philip. Lipstick and powder should be enough. She could feel his hand tightened on the elbow and kept her eyes on the path. The damage was done. Philip had married the girl. She would have to accept the marriage, but it was all wrong. The girl was wrong for Philip. I'm sorry. She found the words difficult. I suppose no mother ever approves the woman her son marries, but a minister's wife should be more socially acceptable. She hoped her emphasis on the word socially acceptable would make it clear to Philip what her objections were without alienating him. She wasn't going to lose her son's affection over some young strumpet. He slid his hand from her elbow and up to her shoulders and pulled her against him. She could hear the rumble of a laughter in his chest. Wilma is my wife, Mother, not the property of the church. I don't intend to be a small church minister with my wife entertaining the local ladies' club. At least not for long. I have other things in mind. What other things? Evangelism, Mother. Oh, it will take me a while, but I want to hold gospel meetings, old time revival meetings. I want to bring hundreds into the fold. Someday, I want my own gospel center and a school. It will take time and money. He turned to her, and the sparkle in his eyes was vital, glowing energy. Clara caught her breath. His energy surged and transmitted itself through his arm into her body. He had a magnetic way of making her want to believe all he said could happen. But Wilma, she said, where does she fit into your plans? What can she do? Philip stopped, gazing at the top of the fierce trees, and looked at her with a sudden blankness to his face. I don't see why you expect her to fit into anything, Mother. All she has to be is my wife, nothing else. Come on, Mother, quit worrying. I don't need Wilma to come and help me. People who believe in me and my work, it will happen. As they approached the house, Philip lifted the lid of the garbage can and dropped the two goslings inside. With a clang of the lid, he paused and wiped his hand across the side of his legs. Clara hung her head and glared at the sprigs of grass protruding from under the edge of the garbage can. Philip, I would like to bury them. Oh, come on, Mother. I've seen you throw away dead chickens without burying them. But these were pets. She couldn't stand the mental image of her two babies lying in the can of potato peelings and ground coffee. She had waited so long to get her pets. It didn't seem right. They could be cut off in the mechanical monster with the motors compressing the tiny feathered creatures into such compacted waste. She had to bury them. Philip hugged her and laughed. You're getting silly in your old age, mother. Anyhow, I think I'll better get back to the car. Wilma will be upset, and we have a long drive to Maupin yet tomorrow. I'm anxious to get started in my first parish. Not so much of a spot, but it's only the beginning. Philip, be careful. That's an odd remark. He smiled at her as they reached the corner of the house. What can happen to me? Clara stood looking at him and shook her head. The child. He tossed his head and laughed. Don't be silly. You get used to the idea of being a grandmother one day. And then you will deny you ever said anything but praises. Clara put her hand over his and withdrew it quickly when she felt a slight tremor in her fingers. She inhaled and dragged the words, staring at the ground as she talked. She couldn't look into Philip's eyes or she could never be able to finish. I'll help you all I can, Philip. Certainly, I haven't begrudged putting you through the school or buying the car for you, but I won't. I won't give you a penny if it goes to support your wife and mother, your wife and child. My God, mother, don't interrupt, Philip. You should have waited until you were established to get married, but and you should have married someone more suitable. If it helps for your church, I'll give it, but never for your own. She paused, and then, because she could think of no other word, she finally said it in half whisper. Your own lust. She felt Philip's finger tighten on her arm, but the outburst she expected was only a chuckling in his throat. You never change, do you, mother? His voice had an amused sound. Clara saw a flash of his smile from the corner of his eyes. She stiffened her shoulders. She let him be amused. He would find out there was more to marriage than the physical side of it. Wait until the girl's atrocious grammar embarrassed him. She felt a weariness at the thought. It made her want to find a chair and sink into the cushions. Some day, Philip, when I am a real grandmother, I'll feel different. I'll feel differently. But that one will never be my grandchild. I can accept your marriage, but not the child. Okay, Mom, but I think you will change your mind. You'll have to come to visit us in Maupin when we get settled. Perhaps I will, but I doubt it. She waves as she half walked, half sprinted towards the car. She watched them pull out of the driveway. Her eyes followed the dust trail behind the car up the long gravel drive to the end to the road. Then she sighed and walked back the path to the tool shed. The shovel was heavier than she remembered. Her arm ached with every push. She placed the two birds gently into the hole. Dirt spilled over the feathered side, and she cried. She wasn't crying for the dead pets. She cried for her son. She shivered and turned towards the house. She was afraid. Afraid for her son and the cat-eyed child. That's the end of chapter 1. Gonna take a short break for coffee and tea. How are you doing so far? There's only one viewer. It's okay. It's a very slow day anyway. Bam bam bam. Bam 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 bam. I don't know who's in the. Oh. Yeah, it's Twisty in the. Thank you. I'm drinking my coffee and my tea. Story's pretty fucked up so far. Pretty good, pretty good. Sorry. Ah! What a day. Slow day, huh? Monday, Monday, Monday. Sorry. Yeah, once I can use the washroom, I'll be right back in about 2 minutes. Oh, hello. Chapter 2. Okay. Should be alright. Guys, my reading is getting worse and worse. My pronunciation is getting worse. I don't know what to do. Feels like I'm having an aneurysm or something. Mm. Okay, let's go. Water. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Afternoon of the Gosling by Marlys Huffman. Chapter 2. The dust was as oppressive as the heat. Dust on the lawn chairs, dust coated her feet,
She could even feel her film of dust when she ran her tongue towards her teeth. Wilma leaned back in the lounge chair and propped her swollen feet up on the footrest. The house perched on 100 yards from the river bank. Below her, she could hear the rushing of the Deschutes River tumbling tumbling over rugged boulders. Behind her, the sound of the neighbor's shovel scraped against the multitude of rocks that riddled the eastern Oregon soil. The afternoon heat was beginning to subside. The residents of Maupin were starting the more strenuous of their outdoor labors, like the extra room for Lyle Bailey was adding to his house. Every evening, Lyle dug a little more, preparing to pour the foundation. Every evening, Wilma listened to the sound and clenched her teeth to keep from screaming at each metallic rasp of the shovel. She squinted at the hill. A paintless farm truck scraped like a wounded animal up the steep, winding grade that led out of town. The faltering engine echoed down into the canyon, on into the hollow bowl of the town site, then slowly faded as the truck followed another bend in the highway. Wilma grunted with the discomfort of a balloon stomach. It lurched and twisted with the activity of its occupant. The combination of the August heat and the pregnancy was making her waver between being crabby and not caring about anything. Languid, Phil called it. She said the word to herself and made a face. It sounded phony. Pooped was a better word, even if Phil didn't like it. She felt pooped and ready to yell at someone. Life wasn't fair. Lyle Bailey could build onto his house when the Baileys didn't need the extra room. The Thayers had to accept what was furnished them by the congregation of the First Brotherhood Church. The church people had not been generous with the living quarters, no matter what Phil said about the Sunday collections. A parsonage? The place was only a one-bedroom shack that was a kind-hearted description. If any house needed to be enlarged, it was the parsonage, but Phil could always manage to discover other causes the church members found more exciting. Causes like the new hymnals they carve out they carve up for those. Phil had even interested 6 other churches in them. Why couldn't he use his fancy talk to get the church to build them an extra bedroom? Cerise had to sleep on the lumpy studio couch with its sagging middle. The baby would have to be shoved in one corner of the bedroom. The crib, a hand-me-down affair from the ladies' circle, took up all the extra space she wanted for a sewing machine. Now the sewing machine was pushed into the closet. Might as well be there, she thought. It was too hot to sew. The fabric stuck to the sweat of her arm. The bedroom was too stuffy for sewing and sleeping. She closed her eyes and tried to block out the sounds of the Lyle's shovels. The metallic grating noise made her head ache. Everything seemed to make her head ache this week. Even Cerise running across the porch had made her snappy and annoyed. Cerise. Where was Cerise? She tilted her head and listened. Mingled with the sounds of the Lyle's digging, she could hear a childish giggle. Evidently, Cerise was tagging Lyle around and capturing worms again. The girl had developed a fascination with the wriggly creatures, or was it with the pennies that she got from Phil whenever he wanted some of them for his fishing? Whatever the reason, Cerise was amused and not bothering her. Amused and grubby, there wasn't any way she could keep Cerise clean in the ever-present dust. Her blonde hair would be so filled with dust the scalp would be black. Her clothes would join the growing mountain of laundry on the back porch. Wilma wiped the perspiration from her forehead and groaned. The laundry would have to be done in the morning before the heat became too intense. Delivery day was getting too close. She didn't want to be home with a new baby and face a stack of mildewed clothes. She would have enough to leave enough clean clothes for Cerise. The sounds of the shovel ceased. The pleasant lilt of Joan Bailey's laughter rippled in the stillness before the digging started once more. You look boiled. Joan's voice surprised Wilma into opening her eyes. I'm sure I sure picked a lousy month to have this kid, Wilma grumbled. She attempted to shift her position, and the plastic lounge chair slipped as it clung onto the sweat of her calves. Cheer up! I have a little something to help. Joan grinned and produced a thermos and two glasses behind her back. My special lemonade. Wilma smiled with relief. I don't think I could have made it through the summer without your lemonade. Let's hope let's hope Phil never decides to taste it. Joan giggled, and she shook the lawn chair, free of dust. He won't. He hates lemonade. Says that his mother never strained the seeds out of it, and he almost choked on one. Wilma sipped the ice-filled liquid and watched Joan sweeping the last of the dust from the chair with one hand. Joan Bailey's shorts crawled up her thighs when she settled into the canvas deck chair. The white terry cloth accented the pecan brown of Joan's tan legs. She looked so slender and healthy. Her radiance made Wilma feel bloated and useless. Well, here's to secrets. Joan lifted her glass in mock toast. May the vodka hold out until the heat wave is over. Shh, Joan, don't. Wilma glanced over her shoulder and around the yard. You're going to say something around Cerise. She's bound to ask me what the word vodka means. She took another sip of the mixture and wiped a drop of sweat from the tip of her nose. Cerise asks so many questions, and Phil always wants to know where she got the idea. As if I know what goes on inside her head. Joan leaned back and put her feet up on the end of Wilma's lounge chair. I don't think I could stand being married to a preacher. Oh, hi. Aloha. Nice to meet you. Have a seat. Sorry, I'm currently reading. Yeah, you can. Yes, thank you so much. You can go to. I don't. You can. Nice outfit, by the way. Um. Yes, you can. I hope you read the. Yeah, you can go to my Twitch channel to listen. Yes, yes. Um. Okay. I don't think I could stand being married to a preacher, even one as good looking as Phil. It's been tough living next door to the parsonage, but at least you are a good egg. I don't have to watch my damn language around you. Only around Phil. Wilma felt a hint of breeze and pushed her hair back from her forehead to let it sweep across her skin. Oh, Phil never makes a big deal of it. Clears his throat kind of loud when I let loose with a son of a bitch. But he doesn't preach at me. At least he's gorgeous to look at, and he's not a meddler like the last character he had here. His wife was worse, always running around doing deeds, trying to make me feel guilty. At least he don't preach to me. Phil says he's the minister, not me. When's the Lord's servant coming home? Joan was frowning at Wilma's puffy ankles. Seems like he should stick around when you're so close to popping that load. The breeze died, and Wilma held the cold glass on the shelf of her stomach. He'll be back late tonight, she answered, aware of the dullness in her voice. Nothing really mattered when it was so hot. He thought he had better visit his mother before the baby arrives. He tried to get there every other month if he can. You should have gone with him and gotten out of the heat. Wilma shook her head. It's Phil she wants to see, not me, and especially not Cerise. She glanced down at her misshapen body. Maybe it will be different after this one is born. She can't say this one isn't a real grandchild. The shadow of the house began to stretch across the yard. Joan reached for the thermos and refilled the glasses. The liquid gurgled out of the container. It's not her fault. She first had to get used to Phil and having a father, then a new home and going to church. We never went to church until I met Phil. Wilma groaned as her back started to ache. Now she's going to have another problem. She'll probably be jealous of the baby, especially if Phil pays more attention to the baby than her. Happens to all kids. God, I hated my kid sister, Joan said. Don't make a big deal of it and she'll get over it. But this is Phil's child, and maybe he'll make a big fuss. Sometimes Cerise acts as if she owns Phil. She doesn't like it when Phil hugs me in front of her. She gets real quiet and her eyes look so hateful. Tough shit. You're too soft-hearted, Wilma. The kid needs a good swat on the fanny. Wilma stared into her drink and shook her head. You sound like Phil. He has two solutions for everything, spanking and praying, she giggled. He prays so much that whenever Cerise does something wrong, she puts her hand together and bows her head before he can do anything. She's outsmart you both. That kid's a stinker, but she's no dummy. Joan's voice had a dry, sarcastic tone Wilma found irritating. She took another swallow of lemonade and decided that it was only the heat. There was no reason for being annoyed with Joan, especially when Joan had agreed to keep Cerise while Wilma was in the hospital. Mommy! Cerise tugged at her arm. Wilma cringed at the dirt on the girl's hand. The breeze returned, carrying the juniper scent from the hills down across the yard. Wilma felt as if she was being mercifully fanned into a slight degree of comfort. Mommy! This time, the tug was hard and jolting. What? She snapped and yanked her arm away. She rubbed at the dirt, clinging to her sweat-dampened arm. Look! She dangled a long angle worm in the air. It's the longest one I ever found. Ugh! Wilma stuck her tongue out in disgust. Go put it away. I'm talking to Joan. But I want you to see my worm. Cerise's voice was shrill. She stomped one foot and wiggled the worm in front of her mother's face. Look at it, Mommy. Please, baby, not now. I want to talk to Joan. Wilma clutched at her stomach. The sight of the repulsive worm dangling so close to her nose made her jerk away. The movement stirred another sharp pain in the small of her back. She winced and rubbed at the offending twinge with her free hand. Cerise, leave your mother alone. Joan barked the command. The heat's making her sick. Cerise swung around. Her blonde pigtails flew about her neck. She glared at the offensive tone in Joan Bailey's voice and then lowered her eyelashes and drew her lips together in a rigid line. For a few seconds, she stared defiantly at Joan. Then, a faint smile crossed her face. She hurled the worm into Joan's lap. You look at him! There was a flashing glint in her eyes before she darted away and scurried around the corner of the house. Damn! Joan tossed the worm into the bushes and looked anxiously at Wilma. Are you okay? You look miserable. Wilma didn't feel like any of the knot of her head. The light was gradually fading and the sound of Lyle's shovel had stopped. The quiet was too pleasant to ruin with words. Even the angry wail of a cat didn't really catch Wilma. Hang on. Oh boy, Cerise found old Bessie again. I can't seem to convince her that Bessie is trying to hide her kittens. Joan got up and brushed at her shorts as if trying to erase traces of the angleworm. Wilma watched her with a wary feeling. She knew she should get up and go after Cerise, but the movement of the air felt so good that she didn't want to budge. If only she could sleep out here. Look, you sit here and enjoy the air, Joan said. I'll find Cerise, give her a bath, and put her to bed. By then, you'll be cool off. Do you think Cerise will let you? Don't worry, I'm bigger than she is. Joan's grin was barely visible in the growing darkness. Wilma suddenly didn't care if Cerise screamed or not. The offer was too inviting. The air is too comforting. She closed her eyes and dozed until a door slammed and the sound of Joan's footsteps rustled dry grass of the lawn. You look better, Joan commented. Want to help finish this off before I head home? She held up the thermos and with a tempting shape. Wilma groped beside the chair of her glass and held it out towards Joan in an answer to the invitation. Cerise gave you any trouble? She asked. Not one bit, Joan said. She drained the last of the lemonade into the two glasses and flopped into the deck chair. You know, it's hard when a kid thinks that a bath is a treat. Anyhow, I guess she wasn't after the cat after all. Bessie seems to have one kitten missing. She's yowling for it. I suppose something must have gotten it. A dog or a tomcat, probably. That's awful. Wilma shuddered. Hey, she still has four. Like Lyle said, it's one less we have to get rid later. Wilma heard the plaintive wail of the cat and scowled. It was almost as if the animal was listening to their conversation and objecting. I hope she doesn't yell like that all night, she said. I have enough trouble trying to sleep with this extra baggage. She patted at her stomach and then began inching her legs over the edge of the chair. She had reached a stage of pregnancy where getting to her feet required 2 or 3 lurching attempts. Joan's strong hands caught her elbow, and Wilma panted to regain her breath when she got to her feet. You got a good night's sleep. You'll get a good night's sleep, Joan urged. I'll toss old Bessie some raw hamburger. She'll be so greedy, she'll forget about her missing kitten. Poor cat. It must be terrifying to lose a child and not know what happened to it. Oh, Wilma, it's just a kitten. I know, but cats must feel the same way people do. I think I would howl worse than Bessie if I lost a child. Wilma stopped and eyed the back steps with loathing. Steps were another problem. Weight had to be shifted. Back and forth, like an elephant, she grunted her way upward step by step. Joan laughed lightly and waited until Wilma reached the porch floor, and then she waved a glass and disappeared into the shadows. Phil eased the car into the driveway, letting it idle its way to stop. The darkness of the house meant Wilma and Cerise were asleep or trying to sleep. The night air was warm and sticky. His shirt tucked to his back and his fingers were moist against the wheel. He reached in the back seat and picked up 2 of the packages. It would take him at least 2 trips to unload. He moved quietly, opening the door with a slow turn of the knob. Cerise stirred and kicked one foot out of under the sheet when he stepped into the living room. He tiptoed across the floor and placed his packages on the table. Wilma would appreciate the electric fan even more when he told her that it was a gift from his mother. Clara Thea was softening. The closer the birth of her own grandchild, the more she inquired about Wilma's health. He made the second trip, taking an extra minutes to sniff in the hint of sage in the night air. The small town was silent. Almost everyone was long asleep at this hour of the night. The river whispered in the darkness, while a few scattered lights indicated there were some restless people stirring. A light flashed on the Baileys, and Joan's nude body was illuminated through the dining room window. Phil could see the white patches where her skin had been protected from the sun. She was too skinny and flat-chested for his taste. Wilma's curvaceous body still held more interest for him, or it would after the baby was born. Joan walked back through the room, showing the whiteness of her bottom, and then the light went out. Too flat. Wilma was better to look at. She had a backside with curves. He shifted his packages and started up the steps, moving carefully. Oh my god. Chris! I haven't seen you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you. I'm currently reading. I'm currently reading the second chapter. Thank you. Thank you for being here, guys. Currently, okay. If you're if you just joined, sorry, oh my god. If you just joined, we are currently reading the second chapter of Afternoon of the Gosling by Marlys Huffman. Okay. mm, Let me see. Where did I stop? Oh my god. Okay. A Cerise groaned in her sleep. Her pale eyelashes flickered and fell back against her cheeks. She rolled over onto her stomach and yawned. In a few minutes, her breathing settled back into a rhythmic pattern. Phil bent and kissed her forehead, then tucked the damp pigtail behind her neck. He picked up the largest carton, sidestepped the improvised doll Wilma had constructed from an orange crate, and tiptoed into the bedroom. He stood in the darkness, listening to the sound of Wilma's breathing in stillness. She moaned in her sleep, and the bed spring creaked with shift of position. Although the windows were open, the house had captured most of the day's heat within the walls and wasn't releasing it. The air in the river-bottom town was unmoving and humid, laden with river moisture. Phil, the bed creaked again, and then the soft light of the lamp beside the bed went on. Wilma blinked, her eyes adjusting to the light, and tucked the sheet over her bulging stomach. In the softness of the lamp's pink light, Wilma's cheeks were glowing. The sight of her wide, eager eyes gave Phil a surge of desire. Even pregnant, Wilma had a more gentle feminine appeal than the athletic body of Joan Bailey. He tugged at the box in his hand, and until the end came loose and pulled out an electric fan. Surprise! Wilma's head rose from the pillow, her eyes and mouth both opened at once. Then her mouth widened into a delighted grin. He placed the fan onto the dresser, aimed it at the bed, and began groping behind the dresser to find the electrical outlet. Oh, Phil, thank you! She laid her head back on the pillow, letting the moving air stir her dark curls. She looked at him with her eyes half closed, a contented smile on her face. The fan whirred and circulated the air about the cramped room. Don't thank me, Phil said, keeping his voice hushed. No point in waking Cerise. Mother sent it. Your mother? Wilma's face showed her amazement in a sudden alertness. Phil pulled off his sweat-soaked shirt and nodded. I think it's a sign she's getting a little mellow. Said she still remembered how miserable she was in the summer. Wilma attempted to roll over to her side. Her fingers clawed at the sheet until she flopped back with a sigh. It's more work than it's worth to turn, she groaned. Her lips drew into a puckered frown. Phil, it's your birthday tomorrow, and it's too hot to make you a cake. He eased himself onto the edge of the bed, trying to avoid jostling her as much as possible. Don't worry about the cake. Mother sent one. It's out on the table. Wilma's eyebrows pulled together. What's gotten into her? A fan? And a cake too? It ain't like her. Isn't, Wilma. Not ain't. Isn't. She drew her lips together and pouted. Well, it isn't then. Phil bent, began unlacing his shoes. Mother can see she has to start being friendly if she expects to see the new baby very often. She's excited, kept saying that she hoped it was a boy. He yanked off his shoes and pulled off his socks. They were moist with sweat, and he hurled them across the room in the direction of the discarded shirt. Wilma, ran her hand up his bare arm and smiled, and he leaned across the bed to kiss her. His lips brushed against hers, gently at first and passionately. The kiss built in intensity until he pushed himself away and took a deep breath. Wilma, his voice rasped in the stillness. He held his head down and closed his eyes, praying for the emotion to subside, at least for a while. It wouldn't be much longer. Wilma's hand remained on his arm. When he opened his eyes, she was watching him with a serene smile of contentment. The fan roiled in the air and created ripples across the sheet. Air delicately caressed the heat-dampened curls at her neck. He took another breath. I almost forgot. There's another surprise. He slipped out of the bedroom, feeling his feet stick to the bare wood floor, then came back with a large pink striped box. Phil! This time, Wilma managed to roll herself onto her side and push herself into a sitting position. Her eyes gleamed with excitement, and her hands reached eagerly for the package. You got me something! It's clothes! I can tell by the box! Her fingers tore at the tape and whisked the top from the box. Then she reached into it, pushed the tissue papers aside, began stroking the satin fabric, using only the tips of her fingers to feel the luxurious softness. Her eyes glistened with tears as she ran her fingers up and across the velvet lapels. Phil, take it out, she whispered in a hushed tone. Hold it up so I can see it, please. He grabbed his bathrobe by the shoulders and pulled it free. Give it a quick shake so that she can see the ice blue satin and run her hands down the length of the material. I bought it to match your eyes, he said, and watched her face shine with pleasure. You need a new robe to take to the hospital. It must have cost a lot. Can we afford it? He reached over and tucked the robe back into the box. We can, was all he said. No reason to explaining to Wilma about the commission checks from the sales of the hymnals. It was a sound business arrangement, but there was no point in having Wilma brag about these deals to everyone she knew. They were good hymnals, large prints, and easy to read, but some people might think that he was only interested in the commission. Her face was still glowing with delight when she turned out the lamp. Her hands rested on his shoulder with an affectionate caress. It mingled with the moving air of the fan, and Phil closed his eyes. As he relaxed, he thought in one last fleeting moment that he had not said a real prayer, at least a devout one, before getting into bed. He hadn't told Wilma all about the good news. His stretch and chugging labor of the washing machine was the next sound he heard. Daylight filled the bedroom, and Wilma's half of the bed was empty. Her voice had a high-pitched edginess. It pierced through the thin wall of the house. Cerise, leave that alone! Phil rolled out of bed, knelt with closed eye for a few minutes, then rose and went to the closet. He stretched around the waiting crib and dragged out the most lightweight slacks and shirts. They caught with stubbornness on the adjoining hangers, and he had to pull them free. One hanger clattered onto the closet floor. Wilma was right. The place was too small. He smiled to himself. It would be nice to tell Wilma about the pleasant home offer, but she talked too much. The deal wouldn't be certain until he held the gospel meeting there next month. The Pleasant Home Church Board had decided to hold a week-long series of gospel meeting. If he brought them new members, if the congregation liked him, they had put up a lot of conditions, but they had promised him half of the collections. Phil glanced about the room. The parsonage at Pleasant Home had 2 large bedrooms, with an extra room at the rear of the house he could use as an office. No point in telling Wilma, not yet. If the Maupin Church board suspected he was leaving, they would be searching for a new minister. They might find one before he was ready to move. He couldn't be sure Wilma wouldn't babble about the offer. She whispered to Joan Bailey, and Joan would tell Lyle. When the deal was certain, he would tell her. Not before. Half the collections, he grinned. He knew how much his smile appealed to women. The collections would be good. After the baby was born, he would take Wilma on a shopping spree somewhere. The Dales, maybe. Her eyes would sparkle as they had at the sight of the new bathrobe. Phil flexed his muscle and readjusted his shorts. The Cerise! This time, Wilma's voice went soaring upward in exasperation. The smack of a flash against flash and a protesting wail meant Cerise had pushed things too far. When he stepped out of the bedroom, Cerise was balanced on the edge of a kitchen chair. Her face was flushed with anger. The flaming imprint of Wilma's hand was silhouetted on Cerise's arm. The color gradually ebbed, and Cerise's mouth clamped itself into a set line. She looked from the cake Phil had brought home to Wilma. Her pale eyelashes lowered. Her eyes were half closed in contemplation. A furrow in the frosting was evidence of Cerise's sampling. Cerise turned and looked up at Phil, and for a second her eyes had held a lustrous glint, and then she slid out of the chair and ran to him, hugging his knees and rubbing her cheek against his thighs. Daddy Phil kissed me first when he came home. That she glared at Wilma and tossed her head, sending one pigtail across another her mouth. She shrugged and pushed it back with one hand. Her face turned up towards Phil with a possessive smile, and she squeezed his leg hard. All because I wouldn't let her have a cake for breakfast, Wilma sighed. Phil patted Cerise's head and pried her fingers from his leg. We'll have the cake for lunch, and you can help me light the candles. He looked down into his face and became aware of a coldness, an evaluation as cold as a bank loan officer's. He frowned and wondered what was going on behind the sober expression on her face. I want to light a candle. Now! Cerise raised one foot, ready to stomp angrily, and then hesitated and lowered it down on the floor. She tilted her head to one side. The baby teeth flashed in a cajoling smile. Please, Daddy Phil, light one. Only one. Phil studied the eager excitement on his small face and had to relent. Oh, what can it hurt? He said. Cerise hopped up and down while he brought the box of wooden matches from the shelf above the refrigerator. He put one candle in the center of the cake, took a match from the box, and looked at her with a serious, questioning gaze. Do you think you can blow this out? Her gaze glistened, and a pigtail bobbed at the nod of her head. She scrambled up onto the chair and suddenly reached for the match. Let me light it, Daddy Phil. Matches are dangerous, Cerise. I'll light it and you can blow. Please? The small face turned into a puckerly pleading. She grabbed his hand and begged, You can watch me, please? Phil inhaled and handed her the match. I suppose I'll never get a cup of coffee if I don't get this over with. He held the box in front of her. Now, do it carefully, Cerise. He tucked her braids back behind her head, struck the match on the box, and then light the candle before it burns down and gets to your finger. She jiggled happily as she gripped the match and scraped it along the sandy surface. The match snapped into two, and her lower lip clamped itself over the upper one with a determined frustration. Try again, Cerise, and this time hold it straight. He tilted the match at the right angle, and Cerise struck the match against the rough striking panel. In a quick movement, the flame ignited. Her eyes opened wide in astonishment. Oh, she squealed, holding the match and staring at the flame. She squinted at him with the beginning of a frown, but held the match to the candle wick as she was told. The wick flared and caught fire just as the match burned down. Cerise jerked and dropped the match onto the floor with a howl of pain. With a quick movement of his foot, Phil extinguished the fire and said, I told you it would happen, Cerise. Matches aren't playthings. He felt a twinge of pity watching her suck on the singed finger. Blow out the candle and go play while I get my coffee, okay? It will hurt It will quit hurting in a few seconds. She sucked in a chestful of air and blew. The flame wavered, died, and then burst back into full fire. This time she leaned forward and blew directly onto the flame until the fire died and smoke curled up from the wick. Phil walked to the stove and poured himself a cup of coffee. Okay, Cerise, he said over his shoulder. You go play. He stepped out onto the back porch. Oh, he got it! Sorry. I'm reading chapter 2 right now. Thank you for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. He stepped out onto the back porch where the ancient washer was whirling another load of clothes behind its circular window. Wilma was folding towels, building a stack of clean laundry across the top of the dryer. When she raised her head, he could see the bluish gray circle underlining her eyes. One hand went to the small of her back and rubbed back and forth. The loose sack of dress pulled itself into a niche between her swollen breasts and the protruding stomach where it clung to the moisture of her body. You feeling alright? Oh, thank you for the beat! Thank you! Oh my god! Thank you! Thank you for the beats, sure. Thank you. Okay. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. Beads of perspiration dotted her forehead behind a curtain of dark curls. Her feet swelled around the thong straps and her milk-engorged breast heaved and when she caught her breath. No, I don't think so, she groaned. This may be the big day. He lowered the cup and bit his lip while he thought hurriedly through his schedule. Are you sure? How can I be sure? She snapped the words out. This pain in my back, it seems to come every 2 hours. In your back? It can't be a labor pain, can it? He suddenly felt uneducated and unsure of himself. This was the portion of the world he had never wondered about. He had said a few comforting words to a worried mother, praised motherhood from the pulpit, but what actually was happening? He looked at Wilma with a confused thought. She must know the answers. She had been through this before. It could mean it's getting close. She folded and refolded the same towel. At last, she dropped it on the stack and shook a dress of Cerise, scrutinized it, and nodded with approval. It went directly to a hanger, then she reached for the socks, matching them with almost automatically and making a new stacks on the dryer. Let me get you a cup of coffee, he floundered and searched for the right words. What was he supposed to do now? For once, Wilma was making the decisions, and he would have to follow her blindly. How was he supposed to act? He turned and stepped back into the house, gulping the last of his own coffee. It sank into his stomach and lodged there, leaving an acid taste in his mouth. The smell assailed him first, then the greyness of the air. Cerise! He hurled his cup in the direction of the cupboard and heard a shattering crack. When he darted towards the living room, flames were shooting out from the wooden crate of a dollhouse. The room was heavily fogged with smoke. Cerise, leaning against the living room door with a confident smirk, she watched the flames with a fascinated rapture. The carton of matches rested on the floor by her foot. He snatched up a throw rug and flung it over the makeshift dollhouse, beating at the flame. Cerise, get some water! He shouted at her with the mounting fury in his chest. She merely stood and watched him with a cold stare. The smirk disappeared, but her eyes glowed with an intense animosity. She was challenging him to put out the fire. He dropped the rug and dashed into the kitchen sink, turning the water on full blast. He grabbed a pan and ran, scurrying back and forth, refilling the pan. Wilma started through the door and halted. Her eyes widened. She froze, sniffed the air, and gaped at Phil's frantic racing back and forth. Her hand clung on to the door casing and her skin paled. Phil hurled one last panful of water on the smoldering wood and panted for breath. The house reeked with stench of charcoal. He glanced at Wilma with reassurance. It's okay, I got it out. Wilma stared at the dollhouse and then Cerise. Her shoulders sagged against the door casing. Tears glistened and trickled down her cheek. The place could have burned down. She choked and turned away. How could she? The rest of the words came murmurings lost as Wilma walked out onto the porch. Phil turned to Cerise and clamped his back teeth together. Control. He had to get control. The urge, it was wrong. Hitting her was wrong. He groped for some words of prayer to staunch the anger that was making him wanting to strike out violently. Cerise reached down and picked up the box of matches, her face composed and uncontrite. She held the carton out towards him. You forgot to put them away, Daddy Phil. He looked at the carton and then at her face. Her eyes were narrowed, and the green intensity of her stare made him gulp for air. His hands clenched into fists. He forced himself to relax, to open his hand and reach out for the box. Cerise, you could have burned the house down. Don't you understand? He heard his own voice shaking and fought the impulse to slap the cold smugness off her face. It was the defiance that irritated him, the rigidness of her spine, the way she stared at him, as if the fire was his fault for leaving the matches out. Her lips drew back, and she gave him the half smile. Then he slowly knelt, looking up at him, and placed the palms of her hands tightly together. Should I say a prayer because I was spat? Her eyelashes dropped, and Phil wondered if he was being mocked. There was something insincere, something taunting in the way she looked up at him. The half smile hovered about her lip. He let his shoulders drop. It was his imagination. Her face was too serene. He took a deep breath and bent to gather up the charred bits of wood with the blackened scatter rug. Yes, Cerise, he sighed. You'd better pray. But you will also not have any birthday cake. You won't have any candles on it now. There's been enough fire in the house for one day. He shoved the carton of matches into his pocket, straightened, and gave one backward glance before he went out the door. Her smile had disappeared. Her eyes were closed. Her hands remained in an attitude of prayer, but her lips was extended in a pout. Phil carried the dampened remains of the incinerator, feeling a sense of satisfaction. For once, he had chosen a punishment Cerise would understand and remember. He stood looking down at the burnt pieces of orange crate and wondered about Cerise. Would his own child be so difficult? He didn't believe heredity would make people bad. No matter what his mother preached, Cerise wasn't bad simply because she was illegitimate. His glance moved towards Wilma's bulky figure wedged in the canvas desk chair. She sat awkwardly, with her feet apart, her shoulders slumped. As he walked towards her, the puffiness of her eyelids told him she has been crying. It's okay, honey. The fire's out, and the only damage is the slightly burnt floor and the orange crate destroyed. He found himself chuckling over the cleverness of his punishment. Cerise is forbidden to have any of the birthday cake. Oh, Phil, she'll be so upset. Wilma looked up at him with a sad twist in the corner of her mouth. Wilma! He softened the anger as quickly as he snapped the word out. It wouldn't do any good to spank her. She will learn more by not having the cake. And what if she's upset? I'm upset now. If the parsonage burned down, where would we live? We might even be asked to leave the church. He frowned down at the grass. Worse yet, Cerise could have burned with it. The humidity, the dryness, this heat makes everything burn like paper. We are lucky we caught it when we did. Oh, Phil. Her voice rose into a scratchy wail. I keep worrying about her. She's such a handful. She's really awful sometimes. Last night, she threw a worm right onto Joan's lap. I really don't know what we are going to do. What if she doesn't like the baby? What am I going? Wilma, stop it! He interrupted when the tone of her voice rose and started to squeak. She was starting into one of her nervous babblings. He patted her hands and held it until she swallowed and subsided into a quiet sniffling. Daddy Phil, can I play now, please? He glanced over his shoulder. Cerise stood on the porch with her hands folded together. Her face was primly sedate as she waited for his answer. Yes, Phil nodded and turned back to Wilma. Her hand suddenly clamped down on his and with an alarming strength. Uh-oh. She took a long breath and her hand relaxed. I think we'd better head for the Dales. That was a real honest to goodness labor pain. She pushed awkwardly against the arms of the deck chair and looked up at him with a grateful smile when he caught her elbow and helped her to her feet. What do I do now? He clutched at her arm and hoped she didn't feel the trembling in his fingers. I'll get the car. Oh gosh, Cerise, what do we do, Cerise? This time it was Wilma who was patting his hand, motherly, patting his hand and murmuring words with peaceful calmness. How could she be so placid and unworried? You go tell Joan, she said. She's going to watch Cerise. Give her the house key while I get my bag. She patted his arms once more, speaking slowly, as if to an infant. Calm down, Phil. We have plenty of time. She walked stiffly towards the house, leaving him staring at her lumbering, swaying gait. He finally shook himself into action and hurried towards the Baileys, passing Cerise, who was busy digging the mound of dirt. When he left the Baileys, he stopped and bent to kiss her lightly on the forehead. You mind, Joan? He said, the innocence of her dirt-smudged face when she looked up into his stirred of a twinge of remorse for his anger at her. We're going to the hospital. When we come back, we'll bring you a brother or sister. Cerise shrugged her shoulders and bent to dig another hole in the pile of earth. Bring a brother. I don't want a sister. He tugged affectionately at a pigtail before he rose. We'll have to take what the God gives us, Cerise. She wrinkled her nose and delved into the hole with one hand. The God better send a brother, she said. Phil rubbed at his chin and watched her, but she was intently inspecting the cavity she had created in the dirt. He scowled and trudged back to the parsonage. It was a long trip to the hospital. Wilma said they had time, but what would he do if they didn't? He should have taken time, should have been interested in becoming a father. He broke into a run and bounded up the stairs, his mind concentrated on getting Wilma to the hospital. Forget the prayer meeting tonight, the congregation would understand. He would call Miss Sims from the hospital. She would take over. He kept his thought on the task of getting Wilma into the car. Take it step by step. Get the car moving. Keep moving. Don't get disturbed. Even when he heard Wilma's short, panting groan, he kept his concentration on the road ahead of him. He started praying to himself. Pray, steer, corner ahead, slow, speed up. He sensed Wilma relaxing against the seat beside him, and his own panic subsided. It was all in God's hand right now. He flexed his fingers, eased his grip on the wheel, and gave her an encouraging smile. He would be able to handle it. She propped one elbow on the edge of the opened a car window and smiled back. Her composure made him feel ridiculous. If she could go through this without getting a case of jitters, why couldn't he? He kept praying to himself until he turned into the hospital parking lot. Now he could say Amen. It was up to Wilma now. Wilma and the doctors. Doctors who looked at him with a condescending patience. Phil stumbled to the nearest chair in the waiting room and collapsed onto the cool plastic surface. Why were so many things happening in one day? He would be glad when it was over. I never knew a day could be so long. Joan Bailey stepped out of the house carrying 2 cans of beer. I wasn't cut out to be a mother. Guess it's a good thing I can't be. Lyle Bailey threw another shovel of dirt on the growing mound of grunt exertion. He jammed the shovel onto the ground, letting the handle point skyward, and walked towards the steps. With one hand, he took one of the beer cans and tore the tap open, smiling at the resounding hiss of escaping air. She's a funny kid. He flopped his flabby haunches down on the step and winced at the pain of his belt buckle digging into the fat of his stomach. Joan settled herself on the step beside him and took a slow drag of the cold liquid. Some days she's a pain in the ass. Thank God she was so good this afternoon. I don't think I could take it if she's got bratty. Not at all in this heat. Bratty? Hell! All that kid does is dig in the dirt for worms. Never said a damn word to me. Digs and chucks a worm in that fruit Josh drags around. Giggles now and then. Maybe the worms tickles. Joan took another sip of beer and looked at the growing pile of dirt. Wonder what you'll do for worms when you get through digging. She squinted at her husband in the growing dusk. Sweat trickled down Lyle's forehead and soaked the back of his denim shirt. He had hoped he would sweat off some of his extra pounds, but Lyle had only increased his beer consumption. I'm through digging, he grunted. Tomorrow night I start building the forms. Be ready to pour the foundation by next week. The gurgling in his throat ended with a beer can being smashed in his hand. Get me another one, will ya, sexy? He grinned at her and swatted her on the fanny when she turned. You ought to gauge your time when by the cans, not the hour, she grumbled good-naturedly. Hell, this is a 2-keg job, not a case, he grinned. The plaintive wail of a cat rose from under the porch. Joan felt a shiver run up her spine at the sound of misery. Damn, old Bessie again. You would think she would settle for 4 kittens and quit fussing because one is missing, she muttered. Lyle swallowed. You mean settle for 3? 3? But there were 4 kittens last night, I looked. Only 3 left tonight. This time I looked. He rubbed the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve and burped. Joan scowled in the darkness. What do you suppose is getting them, Lyle? Who knows? Some tomcat, most likely? He heaved his shoulders back and forth. The dampness of his shirt pulled against his body clung to the roll of fat above his belt. Don't worry about it, for Christ's sake. We'd only have to find homes for the damn things. I doubt if there's anyone left in town who would take one. He swallowed the last of the beer and reached for her with one arm. Your shirt's wet. You're sweating as bad as I am. He gave her a hug and pulled his arm away. It's not sweat, she said. Cerise splashed water all over me when I was washing her hair. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Lyle, is there something wrong with me? I don't like kids. I don't like the kid. She dropped her voice into a whisper. How could she explain the odd feeling Cerise gave her when she stared back from under those pale eyelashes? The kid was so colorless except for the eyes. Cerise made her feel watched. Something about the child made her feel as if she was being watched by an old Bessie. The look in Cerie's eyes when she waited for dinner was exactly like old Bessie when she waited for her cat food. Hell, don't let her get to you. I told you she's a funny kid. Preacher's kid. Who the hell would want to grow up as a preacher's kid? Bound to make her a little weird. Phil's not a bad sort, John argued. He doesn't get on our case because we don't go to church. Hmm. Lyle scratched at his stomach and snorted. Why should he? He made all the old biddies in town think he guaranteed them a special seat in the bus to heaven. He doesn't need us. He's got all he can handle keeping the old ladies convinced he's saving their souls. That man can't save everybody. You think he gave up on us? Joan giggled and leaned closer to him. Maybe he heard some of our noisy lovemaking. We are going to have some close. We are going to have to close the windows. Lyle caught her with one arm and leaned her back against the floor of the porch. A laugh rumbled in the back of his throat. Well, he can't be a purist. He beat her neck and laughed again. It's his old lady that's up in the dells having a kid. He knows a good-looking broad when he sees one. Lyle's mouth ascended over hers before she could answer. His tongue explored her lips and dove into her mouth. One hand went into the opening of her blouse. Joan moaned and twisted to allow his hand to pull the blouse down from off her shoulders. Her arms went around his neck. With one finger traced the outline of his ear. Hey, we'll shock the hell out of the preacher, he muttered into the neck. Fucking on the back porch while his kid's sleeping here. Mm-hmm. She licked at his ear with her tongue, enjoying the saltiness of his skin. He said he wouldn't drive back until tomorrow. Well, in that case, he bent and blew on her neck. There's no one to see us but old Bessie, but she's busy counting her kittens. At the bedroom window, Cerise braced her chin on her hands and watched the dim outline of the figures on the porch. She could see the flash of Joan Bailey's breast before Lyle's head kept bent over his wife's form. She raised up on her knees trying to see what he was doing. She heard John Bailey's giggles and peered through the darkness, trying to hear what they were saying. Why had not Mrs. Bailey left the window open? Mr. Bailey stood up, carrying his wife as easily as the Daddy Phil carried a box of hymnals. Joan Bailey's blouse fell onto the porch floor and was kicked away by her husband's foot. Cerise ducked back from the windows when they moved across the porch. She flopped back onto the bed and listened to the sound of John Bailey's laughter while Mr. Bailey's footsteps stumped down the hallway. The bedroom door slammed, and Cerise scowled into the darkness. She had never heard Daddy Phil and her mother making noises like the Baileys. She knew the bed in Mommy's room squeaked just as bad as the one in the Baileys, but Mommy never squealed like Mrs. Bailey. She rubbed at her eyes and wondered if Daddy Phil ever pulled her Mommy's blouse off like Mr. Bailey had done to Joan. The cat wailed, a long, high-pitched howl that slowly ebbed away. Cerise smiled sleepily. It was a funny sound. She tried to keep her eyes open, listening to the cat to yowl again, but the night grew quiet. Not even the Baileys were making noises. The river gushing sounded far away and whispery. Her eyelids grew heavier, and she yawned one last big yawn. The morning noises were different. Mr. Bailey's truck belched and roared outside the window. Gravel crackled and the engine faded into the sounds of Joan Bailey's barefoot splatting across the floor. Cerise closed her eyes when the flesh-sounding steps came to her bedroom door. She heard the knob squeak as it turned, and she kept her eyelids shut. When the door made a clicking sound, Cerise peeked through her eyelashes. Mrs. Bailey was gone. She could stay in the big bed a little bit longer, roll on it without falling off, and throw her arms out without banging into a wall. She stroked the smooth ribbon edges of the blanket with her fingers and then rubbed it against her cheek. It felt soft, like the one of the new baby blanket her mommy had put in the crib. The blue one with the white rabbits. She caressed her nose and with the blanket listened to the floor creaking as John Bailey walked around the house. There was An old scraping sound, the murmur of voices, and the wail of the cat. The wail rose in a sad cry and faded away. Cerise rolled over and crawled across the bed to the window. The yowling noise came out from under the porch floor in a protesting wail. Yow! Her face contorted in an attempt to imitate the cat's distressed sound. She tried to make noise in her throat, but only a thin squeak emerged. The opening of the bedroom door behind her startled Cerise into a wide-eyed silence. I thought I heard you moving around, John Bailey laughed. Your daddy is here. She pointed at the stack of clothes on the chair beside the bed before she stepped back into the hall. You can have breakfast as soon as you're dressed. Your daddy's having coffee. Cerise nodded and rolled across the bed to slide down to the floor. She could hear John Bailey laughing in the kitchen and try to imitate the sound. Mrs. Bailey laughed so differently from her mother. Mommy had a scratchy laugh. Sometimes it made her ears hurt, but Mrs. Bailey's laugh was fun to hear. It was almost as nice as to listen to Daddy Phil's. She tucked the pink t-shirt over her head and tried to laugh, but the sound wasn't right. It didn't sound like Mrs. Bailey at all. But it sounded better than Mommy's. She forced the sound back into her throat. It came out much lower. She grinned proudly to herself, finished getting her clothes on, and hurried to the kitchen. Daddy Phil put down his coffee cup and swung her up onto his lap. You got your wish, Cerise? It's a baby brother. His arm went around her and hugged her against his chest. Cerise pushed her head tightly against him and smelled the spicy scent of his shaving lotion. She rubbed her cheek across his shirt, listening to his voice rumble in his chest while she answered John Bailey. We named him Matthew John. Wilma left the choice up to me since he was my birthday present. I chose the name that he would be proud of. His laugh boomed in Cerise's ear. She ran her hand down the buttons of his shirt and picked at John Bailey's from under her eyelashes. Mrs. Bailey was looking at Daddy Phil with her mouth partly open. She looked like one of those Daddy Phil's church ladies, the ones who called him Reverend and hung onto his hand for so long. Those were the ones that pinched her cheeks and made clacking sound with their teeth. She pouted and snuggled even more tightly against him. She wrapped her arms around him as far as she could reach and squeeze hard. His hand moved down and patted her bare thigh, rubbing it gently. She rolled with the movement of his body when she reached for a slice of toast and held it out towards her. She shook her head. She didn't want to release her hold. Daddy Phil had never held her in his lap at breakfast time. It must be because Mommy was gone. She liked the hardness of his body. Come on, Cerise. You have to eat before your daddy takes you home. She lifted her eyelashes and looked carefully at John Bailey. The church lady look was gone. Now she had the frowning lines like Mommy had when she said, Don't dawdle, Cerise. John's right. Eat your breakfast. You have to tag along with me for the next couple of days until your mother and brother come home at least. You can leave her with me if you want to, Phil. Cerise looked up at John and held her breath, but Daddy Phil's chuckling response made her let the air loose. No, I'll better take my Gosling with me. Gosling? Phil's laugh was deep inside his chest. Gosling adopts almost anything, cat, dog, or human, if they don't have a natural mother. Tag after it everywhere. Wasn't sure when Wilma and I first got married, but when Cerise decided to accept me, she went overboard. I'm afraid this one is my Gosling. Cerise cuddled against him, wondering what a Gosling was until Phil gave her thigh a gentle pat and slid her off his lap. She climbed into the chair next to his and reached for the glass of milk. It was cold, and Mrs. Bailey had put it in a glass painted with purple flowers. She gulped it hurriedly and started on her toast. If Mommy wasn't going to be home, maybe Daddy Phil would hold her in his lap again. She ate quickly, scooping a huge spoonfuls of cornflakes, bigger than Mommy let her take at a time. Some of them fell off the side of the spoon and onto the checked tablecloth. Cerise glanced hastily from Mrs. Bailey to Daddy Phil, but neither of them was watching her. She scraped the cereal off the tablecloth with a spoon and dumped it back into the bowl before they could see the mess that she was making. They weren't talking about anything important. Mrs. Bailey was jabbering about cement and building the new room. She kept tugging at her shorts and fingering the collars of her blouse. Cerise scraped the bottom of the bowl with her spoon and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I'm done, Daddy Phil." He gave her a grin and pushed his cup aside. "Then get your pajamas. We'll go home." "Oh, I'll bring them over later, Phil," Joan said. She stood up, still pulling at her shorts. "I'll wash up her dirty clothes from yesterday for you." "Thanks, Joan. She does get dirty playing in all Lyle's diggings. Well, he has finished digging. Now he'll just have to shovel it all back when the foundation is poured. Cerise will have to hunt for worms elsewhere, I'm afraid." Cerise bit her upper lip and tugged at Daddy Phil's hand. She didn't understand the laughter in John Bailey's voice, but Mrs. Bailey was looking down at her when she laughed. Cerise kicked at the floor with one foot and scowled. She pulled towards the door, but Daddy Phil continued to talk. "Bring a plate when you come over. I'm stuck with a birthday cake that's going to get stale. Cerise and I can't eat all of it." Cerise held her head down and walked ahead of them to the porch. Daddy Phil had forgotten about not letting her have any birthday cake. Why was he going to give any part of it to Mrs. Bailey? It wasn't fair to give birthday cake to Mrs. Bailey. She wasn't part of their family. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of old Bessie. The cat crawled out from under the porch, blinked at the sunlight, and meowed twice. "Poor thing, she wants to be fed." Joan bent and picked up the cat's yellow bowl. "Sometimes I forget she's around when she's not yowling." The grass crunched under Cerie's feet, making dry popping noises. She took a long time running steps, trying to stay close to Daddy Phil, but he gave her a handshake and dropped it. "You better play outside, Cerise. I have to finish the washing and then write a sermon." "I'll help." She trotted to keep beside him. Then, can we have some cake?" Phil shook his head. "I can do faster without you, Cerise. The cake has to wait until lunchtime. Now, find something to do." Cerise stopped. He wasn't looking at her at all. The long steps he took meant that he didn't want her to keep up. When he wanted her, he took short steps and waited. She stood and watched him. He yanked the clothes off the washer and hurled them into the dryer. The clothes Mommy was washing when she went to get the baby brother. She wiggled from one foot to the other and listened to the grass snap under her shoes. Daddy Phil wasn't looking at her, and lunchtime was a long time away. She turned and scuffed his feet across the crunching grass until she reached Mr. Bailey's pile of dirt. The corners of her mouth turned up. She flopped into the soft earth and began to scoop out another hole. The gray-black cat padded across the porch, settled on step, and began licking at her paws. She froze to scrutinize Cerise. The black whiskers twitched twice, and then she returned to working her paws back to the whiteness of her tongue. Cerise squinted into the sun, then turned back to the mound of earth. The hole had to be a lot deeper. She took both hands and scooped deep into the earth. One moment for tea. Lyle Bailey picked up his shovel. Might as well get the dirt out of the way before he worked on the rest of the new addition. He had made a lot of progress in the last 2 weeks. The purple grayness of the cloud worried him. It moved steadily towards the town. The cloud and the humid stillness of the air held threats of an approaching rainstorm. He would have to shovel it back now, fill the cavity around the foundation, before the whole yard become a soggy expanse of mud. He heaved the first shovel of dirt into place, and the cat stirred and lifted her ears. She had been dozing on the braided rug Joan used for her doormat, but the sound of Lyle's shoving startled her into protesting meow. It's okay, Bessie, Lyle said. He pitched the second shovelful towards the base of the concrete wall. Go on back to sleep. But the cat's ears twitched back and forth. She blinked her eyes as if agreeing to his command, but she continued to watch his movements. Like a foreman on a city roads crew, she kept surveillance of his manual labor. He worked at a coordinated, steady pace, feeling the air grow cooler as the cloud moved closer. His rhythm broken only by the sound of the cat's mournful wail. The sound made his arm jerk and dirt spill across the toe of his boots. Damn it, Bessie, stop it! He stopped and shook the dirt off his beer and leaned on the shovel. Hey, sexy, get me a beer, will ya? As he waited for the response from inside the house, the cat clawed at the rug with her white paws and emitted another long, sad wail. Why don't you feed her? He grumbled as Joan appeared in the doorway. She's getting on my nerves. Joan looked down and nudged the cat gently with one foot, but old Bessie only twitched the end of her tail and clawed at the rug once more. She's not hungry, Joan answered. She keeps yowling for her kittens. God! You would think she had gotten over that by now. Hell! It's been 2 weeks since the last one disappeared. He took the can of beer from her hand and drained half of it in one long continuous gulp and then handed it back and picked up the shovel. Thanks. Joan shrugged, took a sip from the can and stood watching him dig. Do you want me to stand here and hold this? She asked. Or can I go now? He continued to move the dirt in a steady and unrelenting pattern of motion. You got something better to do? He grunted. Yeah, wise one I do, she answered. I promised Wilma I'll stay with the baby until she walks up to the store for groceries and gets Cerise some new shoes. Lyle swung the shovel and felt the dampness of sweat between his shoulder blades. He squinted up at the sky. The cloud was still a good distance away. He had time. Where's the preacher? Or doesn't he babysit? He asked. Out of the town for the week. I told you about it. He's holding some revival meetings at some little burg near Portland. Oh, going big time now, I see. Oh, I don't think so. We must seem to think that it was some country town close to his mom's, I think. Doesn't she mind him taking off when the baby is still so young? Lyle asked. Haven't seen her out much since she got home. Wonder if she's feeling okay. Joan erupted in a hearty laugh. Nothing's wrong with her health. She has a new sexy bathrobe and hates to get dressed. The laugh subsided into a giggle, and Phil told her if the meeting goes well, he'll take her to Dale's to buy new outfits. She looked down at her own cut-offs and scratched her head. Wilma's crazy about clothes. Why, I don't know, but she goes ape over the thought of a new dress. Lyle looked down at the exposed dirt and frowned. He glanced at his wife, then dragged the shovel casually over the surface. Well, they'll probably be leaving us before long. What makes you say that? She was looking at him with her eyebrows drawn together. Did Phil say anything? He rubbed the back of his neck and shook his head. No, he didn't say a word. It's easy to see he wouldn't be satisfied with sticking around a hick town like this. Talks about wanting to have revival meetings, thinks he's a future Billy Graham. Guy like him isn't going to stick around Maupin for long, especially if he has a wife with an eye for fancy duds. Nowhere around here for her to wear anything but jeans. He moved the shovel over the couple feet and dug into a mound of dirt. Anyhow, you better hope they do move on, sexy, or you'll be doing a lot of babysitting, and you're not exactly the motherly type. I don't mind now and then, Lyle, especially the baby. She looked at him with a broad smile. He's so adorable with those big eyes, and already he has lots of dark hair. Lyle stopped digging and reached for the can of beer. Okay, in that case, I'll finish this off. The liquid was still cold as it went down, quenching the last of his thirst. How long are you going to be over there? Not long. How long can it take to get a gallon of milk and a pair of shoes? Who knows? With that kid, take her an hour to size up the store and another hour to say what she liked. Joan's voice held the light, teasing laughter of indulgence. She tossed her hair back from her neck with one hand and said, Cerise is different, I admit, but she's crazy about the baby. She'll probably take the first thing Wilma puts on her feet so that she can get home and take care of her new brother. Thought everyone was worried about the kid being jealous. You know how kids are, she answered. They never do what you expect. Cerise acts as if they had the child just for her. Calls him my baby. Joan giggled. Wilma had a hell of a time talking her into leaving the baby. Can you imagine? Cerise didn't like the idea of me holding him. She shoved her blouse under the waistband of her shorts and glanced at the pile of earth. At this rate, you're going. At this rate you are going, I'll be back before you get this mess cleaned up. You're on, he grinned and watched the sway of her narrow hips as she moved across the yard to the back of the door of the parsonage. A cold gust of wind created a miniature dust devil that swirled down the driveway and disintegrated. He looked up at the sky. The clouds were spreading. The western skyline was filled with the darkening threat of rain. The heat wave would be at the end of this storm arrive. He moved the shovel back a couple of feet and probed lightly, tossing out the decaying form of dead kitten. He scowled, then scooped up another shovelful of dirt and reinterred it along the edge of the foundation. Too long dead to try to figure out what killed it. Must have been a dog. A dog would bury it like a bone. He continued to shovel more rapidly as the clouds moved closer. He uncovered two more rotting forms and decided to say nothing about it to Joan. Hell, it wouldn't make any difference. The mound of earth was shrinking. He could see the end of the pile. The end of the pile and the empty fruit jar Cerise used to gather the angleworms. He bent to toss it out of the way. The outline of the jar base was stamped again and again into the dirt, circle after circle. Cerise had stamped down and smoothed the surface with the dirt with the jar. The fruit jar rolled across the grass and stopped just as Lyle pushed the shovel down into the center of the smoothed area. Even the imprint of Cerise's hand showed her efforts to flatten the spot. The shovel turned slightly, and Lyle now stared down at the bodies of the last two kittens. He stepped back and scratched at the odd prickling of his spine. It wasn't a dog's burial. It was the kid, the funny, untalkative kid, sitting out here, picking off old Bessie's kittens one by one and burying them. The prickling went on down his spine, creeping one vertebrae at a time. He stared down at the two dirt-caked wad of grey hair and rubbed his backbone. Hell, the kid was weird. He had said that much to Joan already. She would make a big fuss if he had said anything else. The kid had only saved him a job getting rid of the kittens. Hell, his old man used to drown kittens. Nothing so bad about getting rid of things. But a kid doing it? He lifted the shovel, scooped up the last two bodies, and carried them to join the others. Better not talk about it. Not to Joan, not to anyone. Even worse, to the scratchy-voiced preacher's wife. They wouldn't be around long. The preacher was fixing to move on. Lyle could see it coming, and he was wrong. And if he was wrong, well, he would have to keep an eye on the kid. She would have to be watched. Or would she? Lyle remembered his own first .22. He had shot every bird in sight and even the neighbor's cat. Hell, he hadn't been able to sit down for a week after his old man found out. Could be there. Wasn't anything to be worried about. He worked feverishly at the mountain of dirt, racing the rain and erasing the ideas bouncing through his head. When he stopped, the clouds were directly overhead, darker, lower, and close to spilling its contents. He could hear Wilma's voice shrieking at Cerise to hurry. The screen door at the parsonage squeaked, then banged. Joan ran across the yard and stepped onto the back porch beside him, only a minute ahead of the large drops of rain, huge drops that splattered the dry earth and sent puffy clouds of dust into the air with each landing. Lyle put his arms around his wife and hugged her. The heat wave was over. They watched the water calm down in a vengeful attack against the land. He heard the sound of the Thayer baby crying before a window slam. When he looked across the yard at the Thayer house, he saw the colorless face of Cerise at the window. He stared at the space where the dirt had been piled. She remained at the window staring out. Lyle swallowed a dryness in his throat. She was just only a damn kid. Why the hell was he feeling like he's being inspected? His arm tightened around Joan and pulled her towards the door. Old Bessie stretched and looked up at him. Her unblinking eyes narrowed into slits. She yawned and exposed her white teeth against the pink tongue. Lyle felt goose flesh popping up across his back. He glanced at the Thayer's window once more before he stepped into the house. Cerise's mouth appeared to be partially open in a smile. Her hand lifted as if she was going to wave and then dropped to the windowsill. He could see the flash of her childish teeth before she turned away from the glass. Lyle pushed the door closed behind him and hoped Phil Thayer had a successful revival meeting. With a kid like Cerise, Phil would need an inside track to the heaven. And that is the end of chapter 2. Well, I was going to read chapter 3, but it's already 2 o'clock here. So I think that I don't think I can read that much, basically. Chapter 3 is quite long. Okay, so the thing is I underestimated the length of the chapter because the
Stretch.
okay. Okay. Thank you. I underestimated the length of the chapters because the words are really small for each page, so they are actually quite long for each chapter. Okay, so I think I can only do 2 chapters each time. So this book is a lot longer than I thought it would be. It's quite a surprise, actually. Surprise. Okay. Okay, I got it now. So I have 1, 2, 3. Okay. So it will take me 4 days. Actually, it will take me 4 days to finish up this book. So I'm gonna stop at the end of chapter 2. I don't know how much you guys were listening to the story, but thank you so much for being here today with me. It is if you guys don't know yet, it is a book that I read. It's the first novel that I read when I was a teenager that got me into reading. Basically, before that, I don't really care much for reading. Don't really care much about literature. Um, it's and this is quite a fucked up book. I'm not gonna lie. So, I'm glad that I can share it with you guys. Um, Thank you so much to Hikari for the beats cheer. Thank you so much. And how are you guys finding the story so far? Is it like weird? Like the writer for this book only wrote this book, and I suspect that she probably used like a pseudonym. So I don't really know exactly like if she like I try to find like or maybe she wrote more books or something, but she only wrote this one, or at least with this pseudonym, I guess that she only wrote this book. And I feel like this book is like it's the foundation of how I write as well. Like I used to write short stories, and you know how in school they make you like write stuff. Yeah, I learned a lot about like sentence constructing and um, dialogue writing and everything through this book. It's not the best, it's not the most perfect book out there to learn writing from, but as a teenager, it definitely helped me a lot in like how to write properly. And before that, I wasn't really good in English. Before I started to have like a interest in like literature, English literature, I would I don't really care much about the English language. Um, but now I think to myself that I cannot live without the English language. Like this it's the only thing that I'm good at. Yeah, and also if you guys are in my chat, there you guys can. Oh yeah, Hikari already joined. Hello, Hikari. Uh, yeah, so I do have a Discord, but it's not very active. So don't be afraid that you get bombarded with like a lot of stuff. People in that sub in my Discord is not very active. I myself is not very active in there. Um, so yeah. How do you guys find the story? I don't know if I feel like after I took my hiatus, my reading become a lot worse. Like a lot worse. It's become so bad. I'm not sure why. Um, I need to like stop rushing my sentences. It's difficult. Actually, you know what? Reading a novel out loud is difficult. I don't know how I used to do it. I just remember that I used to be really good at it, and then now I'm not good at it anymore. And yeah, I stutter a lot. I stutter too much actually, and I stutter too much. It's kind of like break the immersion for people, and I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I hope you guys don't mind my terrible reading. I'm gonna try to read better. It's difficult. How are you guys doing so far on a Monday? How are you guys doing? It's a slow day for me. I'm really hoping that I'll get more work or something. Oh, Hikari, you gonna go? It's okay. I have a lot of I have a look at my main scenario. It's so long. It's like I have so much to do for my main scenario. I'm so lazy. Chris, did you change your last name? The perfect legend. Oh. Wanderer. What you came from? Aloha, you came from somewhere? Thank you so much. Chris, I don't remember your surname being Finney. Oh, am I like mistaken? Have I mistaken you? With someone else? Why the perfect legend? Why? Where is it from? Guys, I uh I have a lot to do. I realize I have a lot to do. Oh, Atomos. Okay, Atomos. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being my friend. I have a lot to do. I, I used to be super updated with like the raiding scene, and then I took a hiatus from the game and everything, and then I'm no longer updated in the raiding scene. It's kind of sad. Kind of wish it. I mean, there's a group that like, you guys know Great Gatsby. I'm sure you guys know who Great Gatsby is. I'm pretty sure he's not even awake yet right now, but supposed to ask him to help me with raiding, but I didn't. I'm so lazy. I need to pick up all the raiding quests. I need to pick up main scenario quests. I kind of want to do the main scenario quests on stream. So that's why I'm like kind of pushing it behind. Healy is because my partner wants to get the weapon, so I'm only doing. I like doing Healy quests. I'm just babbling right now. I think it's time for me to like shut the fuck up and go eat lunch. But thank you so much for the beats cheer. Seriously, it's whatever that I'm doing in this game is nothing compared to other streamers. All I do is just read, which is a very weird event, I would say, compared to what other people do. Like, look at that. Maid Cafe. Host Club. Look at that. Isn't that great? All these people with their amazing mini sim. Jesus Christ. Yeah. No, is nobody doing raids anymore? I wanna. Oh my god! I remember running this one a million times just to get the mount, and I'm so happy I have the mount. But the fight was really fun, so it's like definitely one of the things that I really enjoy. Heidi. Heidi. Okay, guys. Thank you so much for being here today with me. Thank you so much for listening to me read, even though I'm doing really bad lately. I'm going to replenish my tea and also quench my thirst because I can feel a sore throat coming. And I will see you guys again next time. Yes, you have a good lunch to you guys as well. Seriously, guys, have a good lunch as well. Chris, are you the same Chris? I feel so weird. Like, I don't think you used to be a girl. I think, yeah. I mean, yeah, see ya, Hikari. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Okay, so without further ado, I mean, I'm not gonna anyway, thank you for being here with me today. I am very happy that you guys are here with me, listening to me read, and I shall send you guys off with my favorite song in the world.
Have you ever had a dream that you could don't do you want to
Hey, have a great afternoon, evening, and night, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday for chapter 3. Have a good day and have a good rest. Goodbye. Thank you for being here today. Thank you.